This is The Zero Hour with RJ Eskow, produced by the WeAct Radio Network in Washington, D.C., and broadcast across the nation. Visit us online at thisisthezerohour.com or at youtube.com/thezerohour. Ladies and gentlemen, RJ Eskow.
Don't they know it's the end? Oh, hello, it's the end of the world. Thank you for coming back to the Zero Hour. You know, we call this show the Zero Hour because, frankly, things are going to hell in a handbasket. And I say that as somebody who doesn't even know necessarily what a handbasket is. But we're in bad shape, and this week things got worse. I wish I could give you good news, but we got other news. By now, all of you, I assume, if you're listening to this show, are people who know about the McCutcheon decision. If you do not, the McCutcheon decision is another step in John Roberts' incremental plan to allow money to completely dominate American politics instead of overwhelmingly dominate American politics as it does today. So we are losing control of our political system, and we'll be talking about that on today's show. We'll have Ryan Clayton of the Wolf Pack on to talk to us about the not-so-slow erosion of the political process. And, you know, this is so integral to what we do here on the Zero Hour, and here's why. Because this really is a critical moment in human history. And what's making it critical, the environment, the loss of freedoms around the world, global economic instability, the increasing gulf between the wealthy few and the rest of us, is made worse when we lose even the vestiges of democracy. That's what we are in the process of doing right now. So this could not be a more important topic. As the poet said, there is a war for the imagination, and all other wars are subsumed in it. This is a war for our ability to even imagine what a democracy would be like, and then fight for it. So that is a rallying cry of the moment. We'll have Ryan Clayton on to talk about that. We're also going to talk about the fact that part of this hijacking of democracy involves robbing people of their Social Security benefits instead of, as we should be doing, expanding Social Security benefits. So we'll be talking to Max Richmond of the National Coalition to Protect Social Security and Medicare about the movement to expand Social Security. In this first hour, we'll be talking with Stephen Rosenfeld, who wrote an excellent piece on millennials and deficit hawks. And we will, in fact, be getting back to Stephen on this, because we will be getting back to the global topic and to the specific issue of MSNBC's continued refusal to correct the misinformation that they have been disseminating about Social Security. We're not going off that case. We're going to be talking about that in just a minute. We'll also be talking about wage theft at McDonald's with someone who was a supervisor at McDonald's and still feels badly about what she had to do to the good folks working for her. We'll be talking about the Fort Hood shooting, because money in politics has been closely linked to the drive to lighten gun control regulations and to things like the Stand Your Ground law. Of course, we had the tragic shooting in Fort Hood. Cliff Schechter, who's been very active in the gun control issue, will be talking about that. We'll also be talking about what in human nature makes us fight and struggle the way we do. And we'll be talking about money in politics and how that dovetails into the Hillary Clinton 2016 Super PAC effort. So we have a terrific show coming up. We'll also be talking about climate change and how they're perverting the discussion of climate change, and particularly the role of the so-called data journalists, especially Nate Silver in that. And we'll be talking, because a lot of change begins at the State House level. The other side is focusing a lot of money on the State House level. So we'll be talking about State House developments with Carolyn Fiddler, who stays on top of all of this stuff for us. So we've got a great show coming up. If by great you mean A, informative, B, gripping, and C, thoroughly depressing. But I don't want you to be depressed. I want you to be energized, activated, and willing to fight at the end of the next 3 hours. I hope you stick with us. I'm RJ Eskow, and this sure is the Zero Hour. We'll be right back.
If you're planning to replace your Social Security card simply because you don't have it, you may not need to replace it at all. What's most important is that you remember your Social Security number. Remember during school how you memorized information and answers for tests? In the same way, you should memorize your Social Security number. Knowing your number is important, but having the card may not be. If you really do need to get a replacement card to show to an employer, it's easy to apply for a new one. Find out how at www.socialsecurity.gov/SS number.
Sergeant Michelle Garcia served meritoriously in Iraq and has the medals to prove it. Soon after leaving the Navy, Lieutenant Chris Scott found a job, a home, and started a family of his own. Corpsman Richard Stokely took the skills he learned in Vietnam and put them to good use as a paramedic. But soon after leaving the military, each of these veterans fell on hard times and faced homelessness. Even after Michelle lost all her savings, even after Chris wasn't able to pay his mortgage, and even after Richard battled alcoholism for years, they each reached out for help when they needed it most. A simple phone call put them in touch with a trained professional from the Department of Veterans Affairs. That call got Michelle a place to stay until she could afford one of her own, put Chris in touch with employment assistance, and found Richard a substance abuse program. These veterans are success stories not only for how they were able to help others while serving their country, but for how they were able to let others help them. If you know of or are a veteran in need, make the call.
Packers,
Vikings,
Red State,
Blue State.
We come from different places.
Uptown,
Downtown.
We come to different conclusions.
half empty,
Half full.
But no matter how different we are, we're all connected, and we can all make a difference. That's why United Way brings people, expertise, and resources together to improve the education, income, and health of our communities, the building blocks for a better life. When we live united, our efforts, magnified by others, add up to real change. Children succeed in school, families gain financial stability, the health of our neighbors improves, and suddenly, so do our communities. But real change won't happen without you.
Live united.
So let's look beyond our differences.
live united.
One by one, let's make a difference. Let's reach out a hand to one and influence the condition of all.
Live united.
Give, advocate, volunteer. Live United. Sign up today at liveunited.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
This entire piece of music was played with only two instruments, a right hand and a left hand. Hands can do incredible things, but nothing compares to using them to help save a life with hands-only CPR. If an adult suddenly collapses, call 911, then push hard and fast in the center of their chest until help arrives. Hands-only CPR is recommended by the American Heart Association, and it's incredibly easy and effective. For more information on hands-only CPR and to make your own hand symphony track, visit handsonlycpr.org today. The power to help save a life is in your hands. A message from the American Heart Association and the Ad Council.
And we are back on the Zero Hour. I'm Richard Eskow, and in this segment, upcoming in a couple minutes, we will be talking about millennials and Social Security, which brings me to my opening remarks on this topic. We are now in day 21 of America held hostage to MSNBC's refusal to correct the misinformation which they provided to viewers of The Cycle, a panel television program which is geared toward millennials, and specifically the misinformation provided by billionaire heiress Abby Huntsman, who misinformed. Now, again, as I always say, you're entitled, as everybody always says, it's a cliche, you're entitled to your own opinions, but not your own facts. Abby Huntsman significantly misrepresented the facts, misled viewers of MSNBC. We've asked nicely. A lot of people have asked nicely for MSNBC and The Cycle to correct that misinformation. They did not do so. In fact, Ms. Huntsman doubled down on her deception with one minor tweak or correction. She doubled down on it about a week ago. So what does that tell us? That tells us, producers love controversy. They love controversy because it increases ratings. Now, in this case, it shouldn't be a controversy. Abby Hoffman, I call her that all the time. Abby Huntsman, I apologize to Abby Hoffman, God rest his soul. But Abby Huntsman, said, hey, man, it's not about me. That was part of her reaction last week. No, it's not about you, because the very same arguments that Abby Huntsman is giving, the very same misinformation and deceptions that she offered in her commentary, were offered by a journalist named John T. Flynn in 1938, when he also opposed Social Security and was willing to bend the facts to do it. John Flynn was discredited at the time. It's been offered in the 50s by people with a right-wing agenda, and President Eisenhower, a Republican, convened a commission to look into all of that, a commission of insurance executives, and Republicans and Democrats conclusively found that what Abby Hoffman and her ilk says is wrong and misleading. Of course, the billionaire Pete Peterson has been promoting this kind of thing for a long time. So no, it's not about her. It's about the misinformation and whether the advertisers on MSNBC will allow their dollars to be used for that purpose. So quickly, before we go into our segment, I just want to let you know who some of those advertisers are whose money is being used to mislead, because I think it would be good to educate them on them. Bayer, which is good, and Aleve, both are sponsoring this through Philips and the Bayer Corporation, which is good because all this stuff is giving me a headache, and I'm sure you too. Nestle, E-Trade, Golden Corral, Purina, which, by the way, is going to be the primary vendor of food to seniors if the Abby Huntsmans of the world get the way, A Place for Mom, BP, who else but British Petroleum, right? Bank of America, who else? And Prudential, who, ironically, ran an ad during Abby's latest misleading rant, which talked about how seniors needed the right numbers in order to plan for their future. I believe that Prudential believes that, so it would be good for them to know that their dollars are being misused to misinform people about their financial future when they enter retirement. So, somebody probably ought to let them know. Maybe some viewers will do that. With that, I want to introduce Stephen Rosenfeld of Alternet, who has written a number of great pieces. I always read Stephen's work, and he did a terrific piece for them called How Deficit Hawks, that's, these billionaire-funded and Wall Street-funded groups, are pitting millennials against seniors to attack Social Security and Medicare. Stephen, thanks so much for being with us.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, you heard my rant. You disagree with anything I said?
No, and the thing about this is... Hey, and former executive producer of an Air America Radio, remember that network show? I know all about, like you do, that, conflict, brings ears, eyeballs and all that sort of stuff. But, there are some things that are really, what's the right way of saying it? They shouldn't be the subject of propagandizing, because the bottom line is it has to do with how everybody in everybody's family ends up being treated. Are we going to get enough after a lifetime of work and putting, money away every week into social insurance programs? And in politics, people, they pick all kinds of fights for purposes they don't entirely reveal. And what's so interesting about this, what's happening around Social Security, is just as the conversation is changing, which is to say it's not dominated by people who say, cut, 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 cut. It's actually, people are beginning to say, not enough, but beginning to say, hey, what are people getting? Is it going to be enough? Is it going to be indexed for inflation based on what really are cost of living increases for the elderly, people who are people who are in their senior decades? Just as that's happening, what happens? Well, the right-wingers who want to privatize this so they can collect a fee on every single dollar saved, they start trotting out old arguments, basically to divide people. And one of the favorite ones, and this is where Dear Abby is playing a big part in this, and I don't think it's unconscious. One of the big ones is, well, these old folks are well off, and they're taking money away and opportunity away from the young. And the young people today are struggling more than ever. So, and it's just a false choice. And it's not just her. We hear it from the head of polling at Pew, Paul Taylor. Paul Taylor has NPR as a podium where all those wealthy, educated listeners are believing they're getting something that's unbiased, and it's not. And the thing is, what I wrote about was,
yeah, I just have to cut in to say the name. Paul Taylor, what he's done is outrageous, as you point out, and, subliminally, and this was not deliberate, but look, it's called the Pew Trust. If you can't trust the Pew Trust, a pew is in a church. A trust is trust. Who can you trust? I mean, I digress a little bit, but you're absolutely right. These arguments are as old as the sky. The only thing I would disagree with you with maybe a little bit is that I think with Abby Huntsman, it may be a little. My sense is she's just being fed her lines and told what to say.
Well, I don't really know. The truth is, I don't know. We can speculate. But the thing that I found really notable is that, one, just as we're seeing the conversation shift, certain old attacks return and quickly are given credence by virtue of how they're treated, by fairly important media platforms. MSNBC is not insignificant. NPR is not insignificant. And what happens is, what I wrote about was that we saw these exact same lines and tactics come up in the 1980s. The last time Social Security was a major reform bill was before Congress. We saw the same editorials in U.S. News and World Report. And we also saw, which was really amazing, some of the libertarian think tanks publishing articles talking about how this generational divide was the only kind of strategy that would work, because anybody who's in middle age or older knows very well that they're not going to fall for it. They know very well that they've been paying their entire lives, and they expect some kind of financial security coming from Social Security and some kind of health care benefit coming from Medicare. And that
you touched on something very important there, Stephen, and I don't want to neglect it. I'm sorry, and that is this. You touched on the Cato Institute and what they called achieving a Leninist strategy. Maybe you can tell our listeners a little bit about that.
Well, it's amazing. In all areas of sort of right-wing, political history, there seem to be these founding documents that lay out the ideas for what ends up being, decades of conservative, ideological activism. And there's one for this whole generational divide notion when it comes to Social Security. And it's an article whose title you just read. It's got that crazy, Lenin in the title argument. But it basically says, the libertarians don't like the idea of any government program that works on a large scale. They also believe that a small number of people, like the founders, can cause a revolution. So what they did in this article was they were saying, well, if we can just have enough people on our side who can start, planting these seeds of discontent among the youth and say stuff like, you're never going to get anything, and it won't be there when you're older. None of that is true. And therefore create this sense of moral indignation, the how dare you take money from my pocket because just so you can, I don't know, go to Florida again.
Right. Play shuffleboard or all those, really offensive cliches about older people. So, and again, this is where I have a problem, and this is where, you touched on this. You didn't go into the side of it because, you can't do every topic at once. But, Cato, again, it's okay to disagree. It's okay to have a radical libertarian philosophy. I mean, my attitude is always show me where that's ever worked. It's okay to have that philosophy. It's not okay to lie, mislead, and deceive the way the Cato. Is it fair to characterize the Cato memo as suggesting that people be misled by telling them that the money won't be there when there will be money there and money continuing to come in?
Yeah, listen, so here's what's so interesting about this. Yes, that's all in there. But fast forward to today. Now, since in the last decade, there's been a lot of Wall Street money. You probably talked about Pete Peterson, big Wall Street investor who's put literally hundreds of millions of dollars into think tanks and university curriculum and all kinds of stuff to create this notion that the worst crisis facing America is the debt, which is very arguable. There are many other crises we might talk about, but that's not the point. So what happened was he created this organization in Washington, and they put some young Republicans on the top of it. It's called The Can Kicks Back. And these guys were exposed in emails a couple weeks ago as being, they're concerned about the debt, but they ran out of money, so it was very embarrassing. Well, one of the guys who was leading this decided to run as an independent for Congress in Pennsylvania, the northeastern corner of the state, and he's running against a Tea Partier, this conservative Republican, Tom Marino, who was anti-Obamacare and pro-gun and, the whole da-da-da. So, but anyway, Marino wrote this fundraising letter 2 weeks ago, basically saying that this guy, Nick Triano, who's running against him from this Pete Peterson group, he says, why are Peterson and Kick the Can so dangerous? This is a Republican. Their goal is to increase tax loopholes for the largest corporations in the country, and they plan to pay for this corporate giveaway to the Fortune 500 by cutting Social Security benefits for older Americans. Now, this is not you and me, these lefties, talking. This is a Tea Party Republican member of Congress calling out, this ruse.
Well, that's a great point that you make in your piece, Stephen. We're talking with Stephen Rosenfeld of Alternet. It's a great point that you make because this, the support. There was a poll done about 3 years ago which showed that 76% of self-described Tea Partiers want to protect Social Security and don't believe it should be cut for the deficit or any related reason. So I think what you're getting to here and what your piece underscores is that there's the opportunity for a left-right populist coalition to protect and expand these programs, and that it's a losing agenda with the public, but unfortunately in this week of the McCutcheon decision, a winning agenda with billionaires. And I guess we have about a minute and a half left, so any closing thoughts for us?
Well, yeah. I mean, look, in politics, people give a lot of arguments. They give a lot of one-dimensional arguments to try to sway people's attention or provoke them when the complexity of issues or complexity of life is much grayer. This generational divide is a complete ruse. And the fact of the matter is that if we fix Social Security by just very simply getting rid of the cap on income taxes that the wealthiest people pay into the system, it will fix it for everybody, including today's millennials.
And just in closing, I would add, and I know you know this, it will fix it for everybody forever. So, it always strikes me that these millennial spokespeople, these paid millennial spokespeople, are always saying the old people are going to take your money, so let's instill a program that lets the old people keep the money and takes it from you. So, Stephen Rosenfeld, thanks so much for being with us. I'm sorry we're running out of time, but everybody should read his piece on deficit hawks pitting millennials against seniors. It's in Alternet. And Stephen, thanks so much for being with us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
And we will be right back after this talking about wage theft at McDonald's with someone who practiced it. I'm RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.
To the We Act Radio Network, produced in Washington, D.C. Visit us online at weactradio.com or at youtube.com/weactradiodc.
I had a sore in my mouth that just wouldn't go away. And after a couple of weeks, I went to my doctor.
A sore, lump, or thick patch in your mouth or throat could be a symptom of oral cancer.
My doctor told me I was smart to come in. He said that oral cancer is more common in African American men than in any other group in the U.S. It turns out I did have oral cancer, but it was caught early and my treatment was successful. I'm glad I got it checked. That probably saved my life.
If you're an African American man, you need to know about oral cancer. Visit a doctor or dentist if you see changes in your mouth that don't go away after 2 weeks. It's important to get an oral cancer exam because if you do have cancer, the earlier it's caught, the better. A message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health.
Jeff, I'm home.
Hey, Mom.
So, what did you do today? I noticed the dishes are still in the sink.
I've been busy.
Getting your taxes done like we talked about?
Oh, I got my friend Dave on that. Hey, he's only charging $20.
Not Dave from your high school class who graduated 3 years late.
Yeah, he's good with numbers. Won our fantasy football league last year.
Jeff, I can't believe you would actually take your...
Kidding, Mom. I took all my paperwork over to that preparer just like you recommended.
Using a paid tax preparer this year? Visit irs.gov for some do's and don'ts. Like look for a preparer who has a preparer tax ID number and signs your return. Check out their qualifications and review your tax return before you sign it.
Oh, Jeff, why do you do this to me?
Mom, you're just so easy.
irs.gov. It's the best tax tip of all.
You know, this used to be a good neighborhood. Now it's a mess. You got all these polyps running around.
Colon cancer almost always starts with the polyp. Get the polyp early and stop colon cancer before it even starts.
Where do you think you were running to, huh? I didn't even see you guys there. I don't know.
Get the test, get the polyp,
I want to talk to my lawyer!
get the cure.
I got a phone call!
CD is for everybody, not just for the few. Anyone can share VD with someone nice as you.
If you're curious or confused, get information or a pamphlet at most pharmacies or a health clinic. If you need help, see a doctor.
Would you like to secure stable employment, affordable, high-quality child care, or an opportunity to serve your community through meaningful volunteer and internship experiences? If so, UPO is the place for you. Hello, I'm Andrea Thomas, Vice President of Administration and Chief of Staff for UPO. As the Community Action Agency for Washington, D.C., UPO has proudly served the residents of Washington for the past 50 years. Annually, we impact the lives of nearly 100,000 Washingtonians, 100,000 people advancing their education, securing employment, maintaining housing stability, and investing in their communities through volunteerism. Our vision is a Washington of thriving communities and self-sufficient residents. To learn more about our services and how you can partner with us or donate, visit us at www.upo.org. UPO, where we are uniting people with opportunities.
And we are back on the Zero Hour. And as we've been talking about today, this Supreme Court decision, like the ones before it, put corporations and wealthy people more and more in control of our lives. And it's more important than ever to look at the ways corporations are mistreating the rest of us in this world, and some of those are visible, some of those are not, and it's important to keep them all in the public eye. Our next guest, Kwanzaa Brooks, is a former McDonald's manager. She worked there as a manager for 12 years in Maryland and North Carolina. She made a video for the fast food workers movement talking about how she and other managers were encouraged and pressured to really rob people of their wages, I guess it's fair to say, but she'll tell me. Kwanzaa, thanks so much for being with us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
And you bet. And thanks so much for coming forward. I guess it can't have been easy, right, to start telling people what you've done and what you were pressured to do and how it made you feel. It must have took a little courage, huh?
Well, yeah, it's kind of because I'm still in the area, and you still come across the managers, from time to time you might see them while you're out and about or shopping, or even perhaps when I stop by the store, because I do have children, and, all kids love McDonald's, so.
Unfortunately, that's true.
But it is something that needs to be done. It's something that needs to be spoke about and actually told, so that hopefully it encourages other people that have experienced it to come out and start telling their story as well.
Yeah. So tell us, you were a manager and people are entitled to overtime and, they clock in and they clock out. What were you pressured to do?
The main thing, the pressure came from, it's really controlled by labor, which, some people don't understand. The main pressure comes from keeping your labor down, which is a number that varies from, like, in the teens to maybe the 20. Like, 20% is a good number, but anything under that is excellent, for the whole entire day from all three shifts. And pretty much what I was taught to do and what I was told was, you look in the system when labor is high, and sometimes, to make adjustments, one of the adjustments that you could make would be to look in the system, see who's on the clock, see how many hours they worked, and if they had a break or not. And if they didn't have one, then, you could put it in there. You can actually manually put a break into the system, whether the employee took a break or not, just to balance out the labor. Once you put that 30 minutes in, it will make the number go down because it's going to take 30 minutes worth of work off, and it's going to make the number, whatever, if it was 21 or 22, it's going to bring it down. And,
so that means, so let me just, so our audience understands, but that also means they don't get paid for that half hour that they were actually working.
Exactly, whether they took the break or not.
So now you're saying you got pressure. Tell me about that a little bit. So you're a manager and people are looking at your numbers and you can look at your numbers and it says, here's how much you paid for food or whatever. And you got a figure there that's labor, which is, what people are getting paid. And who's telling you, like, hey, Kwanzaa, your numbers are a little high here on the labor side? Who would say that to you?
That comes from the general manager, the assistant manager, the manager under him. It would come from the assistant. It would come from the GM. Even the area managers, who's over the store, it would come from all of them. Sometimes the owners, because I work for franchise owners as well, it would come from them. Maybe when they're looking at, because they can always look into the system. See, those managers don't have to physically be into the store, so they can know what's going on in the store from home, or some of them have the system in their home computers as well. They can tap into the computer, or they can come up to the store and just go on in the system and know what your labor is. And they would either, if they were in the store with you, they would say something to you at that particular point. Being that I was a closing manager, sometimes they wouldn't say anything to me till the next day. They might leave me a note or leave me a copy of the printout for the night before with the label highlighted in red or yellow, saying too high, you need to control it, watch your labor, things of that nature. So this is something that you hear every day. Check labor every day.
So they're on you about this all the time. And the implication, it was probably never said, but I'm guessing that the implication is, if you want to keep your job, you better get these numbers under control.
Pretty much. I mean, and that's pretty much what the ultimatum that you're given. I mean, they might not just fire you directly, but they might switch your shift around. Like, you might not be a closing manager anymore. You just might come in and work some day hours, a midday shift or something, or they might transfer you to another store. I mean, you bounce around a lot, but it doesn't matter which store you work in or which McDonald's, which city or which state. The only thing that they're focused on is their labor and their food costs, things that come out of this 100% total for the day. And it's so sad because at the end of the day, all that does is bring them a bonus. We don't see the bonus. This is for the area managers, the corporate high top people. They're the only ones that focus on this number because it's a competition. It's a competition between this store and all the other stores in the city. So at the end of the month, they look at it and they sit there and they base, this store had a low rate for the whole month. They ran a 17% for the month or for the last 2 months. And that's where their bonuses will come from. They will literally get a bonus for it. So it's not that they're really concerned about the service time or they're really concerned about the customer service or anything. They're worried about the number because what they're going to get from it, their benefit from it.
That's really interesting. And now let me ask you, because, we've been talking for a few minutes now. I can tell you're a nice person. I can tell you're a good person. Did you feel bad at the time? I mean, did you just kind of slip into this because they were pressuring you and you didn't really have time to think about it? Or did you feel bad at the time? I mean, I'm just curious to know what was kind of like in your heart in the moment.
Well, at the beginning, it was more like I was tricked into doing it. I didn't know that it was actually taking away from the employers because the way that it was explained is like, when you're watching your labor, we were actually at the computer. I was closing the store down. So when she showed me that you can do that, the way it was presented was if by putting the break in only seemed like you were balancing the hours. I didn't know that it was physically taking and from the employees until after a while, after 2 months of working there, a couple of employees came in and started complaining about their check. So when the red flag went off to me that this is something that they were doing, I wouldn't do it. I'm not doing it. I would try, to do labor other ways, whether I had to switch people around or even send somebody home early, which is just as bad. I mean, that's the other way to control it is to send someone home. And that's just as bad because if you're scheduled for 8 hours and you're trying to get at least 30 hours, 40 hours a week, when you come in and work, and because labor's high, I mean, at any given point in time, they'll ask you to go home. So it's like a no-win situation. If you look at it, they're still taking money from you.
They're still taking money from you, and when you do that, that might be more legal and honest.
Exactly. It's more legitimate, but it's still, still making them not have the money that they need, and people count on that.
And not only that, but then the people in your store, they're not going to get as good service because there aren't as many people working, right?
Exactly, and that's the problem that you run into when you are a closing manager is because of that. They keep that labor, they focus on that number so much that from the time they open till about 3 o'clock, they might have sent 2 of your people that probably should have worked till 7 or 8 o'clock. They probably sent them home because labor was so high. So when you come to work, you're left with 5 people versus day shift. They have 12. That's a big difference. Of course you could get cars in and out and the front people in and out, but when you only have 5 people on your shift, that's you included, with 1 person in the grill and 1 cashier and 1 drive-through, it's virtually impossible to try to maintain a low labor and good customer, quality customer service.
Yeah, and it might go okay for an hour, and then you get a crowd of people coming in, and then you're stuck. I know how that goes.
Exactly.
So what are you doing now? I guess you're not working for McDonald's anymore, so you're doing the same kind of work for a different company? Or, I mean, you don't have to tell us who, but you're in the same line of work now?
Well, similar work. Actually, I just got on. I just had relocated back down here, so I actually just did an interview and got a position with another restaurant not too long ago. So I'll be actually starting there. I haven't actually started yet, but I will be starting with them. But no, I haven't gone back to McDonald's in a while. I mean, it's just you get tired of it, and it's like I tell people, this wage stuff. Just let me tell you, it is just one of the many things that are wrong with these stores. I'm glad that they're finally catching up to it, but this is only one issue and one problem that they really, mistreat their employees. It's several others that hopefully will come out, eventually. Even how you can't even get enough hours. It's like McDonald's could be a great job, but when you have family, when you have children, and you have bills. Who can work with 30 hours? They don't even like paying you over 30 hours. They barely schedule you over 30 hours. So, that is not even the average. So you can imagine what your checks and stuff, will look like, and then what your bills and stuff are looking like. So it's
they probably have reasons for keeping it below 30 hours because then, there are less, sometimes there's state and other laws that come in if you're working full time, so they don't want you to work full time and all of that. But listen, as you know, there's a lawsuit now, so maybe some things will start to change. And, congratulations on getting that new job. I can already tell they're getting a really good employee, and they'll be glad to have you. So thanks for coming on the show, Kwanzaa Brooks.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
You bet. Now, we're going to come back on a very different topic after this. We're going to be talking with Cliff Schechter about gun control, but that was Kwanzaa Brooks telling us about some of the wage games they play with labor costs over at McDonald's. There's a pattern tying all this together, folks. That's what we keep talking about here on the Zero Hour. There's a pattern tying all this together. We will be right back after these messages. I'm Richard Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour.
Our children are exposed to violence every day, in their neighborhoods, in their schools, even in their own homes. Exposure to violence can have a devastating and lifelong impact. Through community action and leadership at the national level, we're identifying the children who need our help. I'm Attorney General Eric Holder, and I'm asking those of you who have a role in a child's life to take action. Through your attention and early intervention, we can help children in need to heal, to thrive. Together, we can change their lives and their futures.
Join the Justice Department in defending childhood.
100% success rate in water.
All possible.
No matter what the time is, apply for your benefits. You earn them.
This is Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and I want to tell you about my new favorite discovery, Yosemite National Park. I recently went there with my husband and children, and we walked the trails to see the breathtaking waterfalls, admired the grand meadows, and giant sequoias. But the future of our national parks is uncertain. Many challenges face our parks today, from polluted air and water to development threats outside their borders and inadequate funding to protect our national heritage. That's why the National Parks Conservation Association recently completed a decade-long assessment of the challenges facing our national parks, along with proposed actions that will ensure our children and grandchildren will be able to enjoy the parks as we have. Our national parks have inspired Americans for nearly 100 years. As we approach the centennial of the National Park Service in 2016, please join us in helping to protect our national park legacy. Find out how at www.mpca.org.
Hello, my name is Jim Gray, and I am a judge of the Superior Court in California and a former federal prosecutor in Los Angeles. I would like to talk to you for a moment about marijuana. Did you know that since the federal government first banned marijuana in 1937, usage in this country has actually gone up by about 4,000%? Or did you know that in the Netherlands, where adults are allowed to possess small amounts of marijuana and buy it from government-regulated businesses, fewer adults and fewer teenagers smoke marijuana than here in our country? Or that an American is arrested on marijuana charges every 38 seconds? If you are wondering if any of this makes sense, you are not alone. To find out more, contact the Marijuana Policy Project at 1-877-JOIN-MPP or visit them on the web at mpp.org. Thank you, and good luck to us all.
We are back on the Zero Hour, and with us for this segment is my good friend Cliff Schechter. Cliff is an author, pundit, and public relations strategist. Pete, can we do something? I'm getting a little feedback in my ear. I'm just talking to the producers here. Okay. Cliff's first book is The Real McCain, Why Conservatives Don't Trust Him and Why Independents Shouldn't. He was an on-air political analyst for a lot of groups, including Al Jazeera. With his analysis, it says here, reaching countries spanning the globe, and now he's a regular panelist on a show in Columbus, Ohio. Did I get that right, Cliff?
Mostly. The Columbus, Ohio was a little bit in the past, but everything else is fantastic.
Okay, great. And there's a lot more here, too, but I just don't have time to cover it because we have a subject to get to. Hey, man, thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on, man.
You bet. And I wish we were talking about a better topic. But unfortunately, you and I have talked about gun control before. We talked privately. We talked on the air. We're plagued by these shootings, and unfortunately, we've had another one this week at Fort Hood. What's the latest? Just bring us up to date on what we know so far, if you would.
Yeah, well, what we know is that 4 people were killed, including the shooter himself, Ivan Lopez. He was 34 years old. We know that he killed himself. There were 16 additional people who were injured, a number of them, I think almost half of them, in critical condition. We know that he was in Iraq for 4 months in 2011. He suffered traumatic brain injury, even though he was not in combat, so I don't think we have details on how that occurred, and that he'd suffered from anxiety, depression, and a variety of other psychological problems, and he had been seeing somebody about that. But otherwise, we don't know, and we know, I should say we do know something else. We know, sadly and tragically, he went and bought his gun in the same place, a store called Guns Galore, which almost says everything, doesn't it? That Nidal Hassan, this Fort Hood shooter who killed 13 people in 2009, got his gun from.
And this was something I wanted to talk to you a little bit about because, I don't think enough people are aware, for example, that Nidal Hassan, who was the Fort Hood shooter several years ago, and now Ivan Lopez, people think shooting at a military base, well, those guys all have guns, and the military military actually has pretty strict control over how guns are handled and so on. These guys can just go out, regardless of what they're being treated for or anything else. Like any other American, they can go in and they can go out and buy a gun. Guns galore. It's horrifying. I didn't know that. And then because they can't search everybody coming in and out of the base, they come back in and they perform these horrific acts of violence. Isn't that an important part of this story?
Well, it's a huge part of it. I mean, look, the people that have the guns there, as you point out, the military police. This morning, on MSNBC, somehow the fraudulent John Lott, who's one of these gun researchers who's been bought by right-wing think tanks, went on and he tried to say that everybody on a base should have guns, and he was smacked down by a Medal of Honor winner, Colonel Jacobs, who pointed out that would be chaos and that would have led to fratricide. This is a guy who's commanded troops who may just know a little bit better than a guy, John Lott, who made up a fake internet persona for himself to compliment himself online. But going, taking it further than that, again, our response is what it always is, which is the people who have an interest in protecting the gun culture, who profit from it, who keep political office because of it, claim, well, we've got to figure out what happened, which is just insulting at this point. We don't need to figure out what happened. We know what happened. Another person who had psychological issues, the same thing happened at Virginia Tech, the same thing happened in Aurora, Colorado, the same thing happened in Tucson. In all of these cases, the Navy Yard shooter in Washington, D.C., there was clear evidence of somebody who had a psychological disorder, but we have such a loose-knit system right now where states aren't even, the states are not even required to share all the records they have. A lot of the record keeping is not even done because you only get records on people if they're involuntarily committed. If they're voluntarily committed, you don't. These records are not put into the system. There's so many shortcomings. It's literally like we're doing it to ourselves on purpose. Every other country that has tried to deal with this, Western country, most recently Australia, that had seen a mass shooting every year leading up to their Port Arthur massacre, which was almost like their version of Newtown in 1996, where somebody got their hands on a number of assault weapons and killed about 40 people there. They instituted real reforms after that. They went and they said, there's going to be a 1 month waiting period, and you're going to have to go through psychological testing, and you're going to have a serious background check. We're banning assault weapons. Where they did what countries do when they care about this kind of thing, and in the end, they've not had one mass shooting since then, and their homicides have gone down something like 70%. We know how to stop this. We've seen other countries. In Australia had a history of gun ownership the same as this country, a frontier history, so that excuse can't be used. We're choosing not to. We're saying that this is the price we pay so that everybody out there can get every toy they want whenever they want.
Cliff, are you with us?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. RJ? Did I lose you?
I think you did. One of us lost the other. I don't know how. But, you were saying that we know how to cure this problem, that Australia addressed this problem. And by the way, in my research, and this is going back now a year, but in my research on the topic, I found only one other country that had an ideological notion that gun ownership was a form of freedom, which was Yemen, and Yemen was reevaluating it.
That's right, and they've still had about half the rate of gun ownership we have in this country, which is still about 40-50% above what most other Western countries have. I mean, we're outlandish in this. I don't know where I cut off when I was talking to you before, but the point I was making, which is Australia went literally from one a year to none. They'd had, of these kinds of killings, these mass shootings. They've had none since they passed their reforms in '96. And their homicide and suicide rate, because of how easily we make it for people to get guns here, who leave them around for kids to shoot each other with no liability for it, their homicide rate and their suicide rate both plummeted by about 60-70%. We know how to solve this. We're choosing to let people who want to have every toy they want, every moment they want, to not solve it.
So why aren't we able to pass? Everybody thought, not everybody, because some of us are more hard-nosed than others, but most Americans, I think, thought after the Newtown tragedy that we would pass some form of gun control legislation in this country. Why can't we do it?
Well, a lot of the answer was in what happened this week to further erode our democracy in the McCutcheon case, which is the vast amount of money that's allowed in politics that distorts incentives and basically corrupts and buys off politicians. That's a big part of it. Another part of it is the obstructionism we've got going on in Washington, because one needs to remember we had 55 votes to pass some sane gun safety legislation, and in a body that's supposed to be ruled by democracy, that was still not enough. So, I mean, it's not to say that nothing, we had 55 votes there. A number of states, about 8 or 9, maybe I think more than that, have passed intelligent gun safety regulations since that time. Other states are working on it. The state of Washington is going to have background checks on the ballot this year. A number of states are doing the right thing, but then we've still got this system of ours that allows filibusters, that allows unlimited money, that allows a senator in Wyoming to have the same amount of power who represents 500,000 people as a senator from California who represents 38
Cliff,
million
we
people.
got 30 seconds. I'm going to cut you off there and say, is there someplace people can go to learn more and take some action on this?
I work with a group. I tell them to go to gunvictimsaction.org, the National Gun Victims Action Council, and we're doing a lot of great work, I would say, on trying to use economic measures, boycotts, to start changing our culture around guns. It's a place to start.
Well, that's a great place to start. We were going to stay on this story. Tragically, I used to say after Newtown, I'm not anti-guns, I'm pro-kindergartner. We can say the same thing. If you support the troops, it's another reason to go to the websites you just mentioned and fight for rational gun legislation. Cliff Schachter, thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on, RJ.
You bet. We'll be right after this on the Zero Hour.
I'm Gary Johnson, former governor of New Mexico. Last year, my state became the 12th state to allow medical use of marijuana by patients who are seriously ill. Some people were surprised that a Republican governor supports medical marijuana, but I'm hardly alone. Groups like the American College of Physicians, American Nurses Association, and American Public Health Association have all acknowledged the medical value of marijuana. New research about medical marijuana is coming out almost every day, showing remarkable potential in all sorts of serious conditions, including cancer, AIDS, and chronic pain. But some in government still want to put politics and ideology ahead of public health. To learn more about medical marijuana and what you can do to help, contact the Marijuana Policy Project at 1-877-JOIN-MPP or visit them on the web at mpp.org. Thanks.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. Reuben Jones is one of the millions of American workers who make minimum wage. He was nearly overcome with emotion at a press conference in Washington, D.C. Thursday as the Give America a Raise bus tour ended its 11-state journey pushing for an increase in the minimum wage.
For 5 years, I never got a raise. I never had a chance to go out. I got 2 children and 4 grandchildren. I can't even visit them. I can't visit them at all. I don't have the money to do it. I work every day hard. Excuse me. One day, I was coming home from work from Largo. It was raining. Train stopped running at 11:30. I get to the subway at 11 o'clock, thinking that the train was still running. I get to the train station, the train is gone. Don't have no money to get home from Largo, from D.C. to D.C., so I had to walk. And then turned around, had to go back to work the next day, tired. I do everything in that job that I possibly can. For me to work like this, to be treated like this, it's a shame. Thank you. Please, the people that hear me now, today, please raise the minimum wage. We all need it. We all need it. Please.
Most jobs in America, roughly 81 million, pay less than $20 an hour, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. At least 18 million of those jobs pay less than the $10.10 an hour that Democrats, labor, and progressive organizations say should be the nation's absolute minimum wage. AFL-CIO Secretary-Treasurer Liz Schuler.
Working people are on the move. Working people are on the move.
And it's women and men, and whether they're union or non-union, they're coming together and they're saying the same thing, that people are working hard, but they're not able to make ends meet. Wages have been stagnant despite productivity going up and despite soaring corporate profits. And that is not fair. So a higher minimum wage, as well as reform to allow more collective bargaining, right, is critical. People get it. They live it. And they want Congress to do something about it. They want Congress to act and act now. It really cuts to the core of the struggle of millions of workers around this country. And that's why the labor movement is mobilizing. Labor movement is mobilizing in cities and towns across the country with coalition partners because it has been too long since America has stood together to raise wages and claim that American dream again.
The Dream Action Coalition says it's escalating activities calling for immigration reform and an end to deportations. Erica Andiola, co-director of the Dream Action Coalition, says families of those deported and in detention will make themselves heard at the White House.
That's what we're here to say to the president. We are going to stay outside of your house. We're going to stay outside of your door, your window, until you stop the deportation of our families.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Over 13 million people are affected by famine, war, and drought in the Horn of Africa. Unfortunately, just listening to this commercial won't help them. Just listening won't give them their next meal or shelter or hope. You can help by texting GIVE to 777-444 to donate $10 and by going to usaid.gov/FWD to forward the facts. Brought to you by the Ad Council and USAID. Text donations go directly to Consortium of Humanitarian Relief Organizations. Standard text and data rates apply.
Like that little choo-choo in the children's book, Monday, I Think I Can. And it just keeps chugging up the hill. This progressive citizen in North Carolina.
Your mailbox or email each month for only $15 a year. Yes, 12 issues, only $15. Check it out, hightowerlowdown.org.
This is The Zero Hour with RJ Eskow, produced by the We Act Radio Network in Washington, D.C. and broadcast across the nation. Visit us online at thisisthezerohour.com or at youtube.com/thezerohour. Ladies and gentlemen, RJ Eskow.
Welcome back to The Zero Hour. In this hour, we will be talking with two scientists on why we fight over territory, why we compete the way we do for economic resources, because as we follow the news, whether it's in Ukraine or whether it's here at home, we need to understand those facets of human nature that lead us to do the things that are so harmful and destructive in our lives. We'll be talking with Katie Gluck of Politico about money in politics and about young people's, to my mind, somewhat unexplainable enthusiasm for Hillary Clinton's presidential candidacy in 2016. And we will be talking with Ryan Clayton of the Wolf Pack about the McCutcheon decision and why it's so critical to get money out of politics. But before we do that, I want to say a word or two about Martin Luther King Jr. This week, April 4th, marked the anniversary of Dr. King's assassination. He was shot down in Memphis on April 4th of 1968. We talked with Cliff Schechter in the last hour about gun violence. Sadly, gun violence is still a characteristic of our nation 36 years or 46 years after the death of Dr. King. So what do we do about it? First of all, we mourn what we've lost, and secondly, we learn to move on. The details of Dr. King's death are not fully understood to this day, but we certainly know that guns were involved. And I wanted to, if I may, just give you a little reminder about who the man Dr. Martin Luther King was. Dr. Martin Luther King was, when we have the hagiographies about him now, they talk about the great leader for civil rights, which of course he was, but they characterized him as if he had been a figure with no opponents, with no opposition. When Congress voted for the holiday, for example, only 6 members of Congress and either party voted against it. One of them was Dick Cheney, by the way. But during Martin Luther King's life, it's important to remember he was a controversial figure. And he was a controversial figure for a number of reasons, including the prevalence of racism, which in many ways had not been challenged until the civil rights movement came along. But he was also a controversial figure because Dr. King, who died on April 4th, 1968, was a human being who understood the interconnectedness of individual rights, collective rights, personal freedom, collective freedom, and the underlying economic social forces that tied them together. Dr. King was controversial because, among other things, he was as fierce and outspoken in his advocacy for economic justice as he was in his advocacy for justice in the civil rights world and individual civil rights. Let me give you a couple quotes of Dr. King's that I think it would be very worth us remembering today. In a speech in August of 1967 called "Where Do We Go From Here?", Dr. King said this: "True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It is not haphazard and superficial. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring." Those words echo more strongly than ever in this era of wealth dominating American politics and demanding slashes in taxes so that the wealthy can pay less and so that the poor will have less assistance for heating oil or food or the basic necessities of life, not to mention access to health care. We're moving in the wrong direction. Poverty figures are going up. We need to do something about it. This is also a quote of Dr. King's that I would like everybody to hear. "We must develop a federal program of public works, retraining, and jobs for all, so that none, white or black, will have cause to feel threatened. There is nothing except short-sightedness to prevent us from guaranteeing an annual minimum and livable income for every American family." It's time to declare a minimum income for every American. It's time to demand a federal jobs program. The American Society of Civil Engineers said in their latest report that it would take $3.6 trillion worth of construction work to repair our infrastructure. We need a job for every American. We need to repair our infrastructure. And yes, it may sound radical now, but Dr. King was advocating it in 1968. Even Richard Nixon proposed it, and it almost passed the Senate, a minimum income for every American. It's time for that. He also said the unemployed, poverty-stricken white man must be made to realize he is in the very same boat with the Negro. Again, Tea parties may divide us. We are in the same boat together. Another quote, more relevant today than ever. Dr. King said in Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence, April 1967, Dr. King said, "A true revolution of values will soon look uneasily on the glaring contrast of poverty and wealth. That contrast between the ultra-rich and the rest of us is more extreme today than at any time in American history, including when Dr. King said those words." The profit motive, Dr. King said. We have the Koch brothers, Charles Koch complaining that he's called un-American and all Americans should support his Koch Industries interference with the political process. Dr. King said, the profit motive, when it is the sole basis for an economic system, encourages a cutthroat competition and selfish ambition that encourages men to be I-centered rather than thou-centered. Take that, Ayn Rand. We'll give you maybe one or two more Dr. King quotes to go. Let's go out with this one. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than computer, the giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. I'll say it again. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. That's your answer to corporate personhood. From the words of Martin Luther King, assassinated on April 4th, 1968, this week, 46 years ago. I'm RJ Eskow. We will be back. This is the Zero Hour.
If you're planning to replace your Social Security card simply because you don't have it, you may not need to replace it at all. What's most important is that you remember your Social Security number. Remember during school how you memorized information and answers for tests? In the same way, you should memorize your Social Security number. Knowing your number is important, but having the card may not be. If you really do need to get a replacement card to show to an employer, it's easy to apply for a new one. Find out how at www.socialsecurity.gov/SS number.
Sergeant Michelle Garcia served meritoriously in Iraq and has the medals to prove it. Soon after leaving the Navy, Lieutenant Chris Scott found a job, a home, and started a family of his own. Corpsman Richard Stokely took the skills he learned in Vietnam and put them to good use as a paramedic. But soon after leaving the military, each of these veterans fell on hard times and faced homelessness. Even after Michelle lost all her savings, even after Chris wasn't able to pay his mortgage, and even after Richard battled alcoholism for years, they each reached out for help when they needed it most. A simple phone call put them in touch with a trained professional from the Department of Veterans Affairs. That call got Michelle a place to stay until she could afford one of her own, put Chris in touch with employment assistance, and found Richard a substance abuse program. These veterans are success stories not only for how they were able to help others while serving their country, but for how they were able to let others help them. If you know of or are a veteran in need, make the call.
Packers.
Vikings.
Red State.
Blue State.
We come from different places. Uptown.
Downtown.
We come to different conclusions. Half empty.
Half full.
But no matter how different we are, we're all connected, and we can all make a difference. That's why United Way brings people, expertise, and resources together to improve the education, income, and health of our communities, the building blocks for a better life. When we live united, our efforts, magnified by others, add up to real change. Children succeed in school, families gain financial stability, the health of our neighbors improves, and suddenly, so do our communities. But real change won't happen without you.
Live united.
So let's look beyond our differences.
Live united.
One by one, let's make a difference. Let's reach out a hand to one and influence the condition of all.
Live united.
Give, advocate, volunteer. Live United. Sign up today at liveunited.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
This entire piece of music was played with only two instruments, a right hand and a left hand. Hands can do incredible things, but nothing compares to using them to help save a life with hands-only CPR. If an adult suddenly collapses, call 911, then push hard and fast in the center of their chest until help arrives. Hands-only CPR is recommended by the American Heart Association, and it's incredibly easy and effective. For more information on hands-only CPR and to make your own hand symphony track, visit handsonlycpr.org today. The power to help save a life is in your hands. A message from the American Heart Association and the Ad Council.
And we are back on the Zero Hour. In this segment, we're going to take a somewhat longer view, both forward and backward in time, and explore the notion of why we fight over territory. Our two guests have published a paper entitled Grounds for War, The Evolution of Territorial Conflict. With us now to discuss their paper is Professor Dominic D.P. Johnson. He is Professor of International Relations at the University of Oxford, and his co-author, Monica Duffy-Toft, who is Professor of Government and Public Policy at the University of Oxford. To both of you, may I say thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Oh, you bet. I think you've written a very interesting and potentially important paper, and I wanted to ask you a bit about it. You've explored the history of human conflict, territorial conflict, and suggested that this is, in fact, not a hardwired behavior, but certainly a historically human as well as animal behavior that might explain some current events as well. Now, I'm sure I've misrepresented the subtleties of your position a little bit, but could you give us a brief summary of your paper with that in mind? And correct me where I've been wrong?
Okay, let me start. That was a good summary. It's not hardwired, but our observation is simply that territorial conflict is in no way unique to humans, and in fact is found across the animal kingdom. So it's something about biological organisms, and we're no different.
Okay, well, if it's, I guess, the number one question, and you are both in the government and public policy area, not the evolutionary biology field, for example, but I guess the obvious question people are going to be asking is, well, if it's not hardwired, why would we do it? Why would this be a human habit that's evolved as well as an animal habit that's been in existence for so long?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one possible answer is simply that territorial behavior is a good strategic solution to a common problem. So it might be that we haven't necessarily inherited it, but we've come to the same conclusion about the best way to deal with territorial conflict, just as many other animals have. And in the paper, we talk about evolutionary game theory and the idea that a good strategic solution to defending resources is, in certain conditions, territorial aggression. So it might be that we're all facing a very similar problem in its essence. Of course, the details are different. In the human case, it is much more complicated. There's lots of other things going on as well. But the fundamental problem is the same.
You know, I find myself navigating a little semantic minefield here in the sense that I don't want to say, for example, it's an instinctive response because that suggests hardwired. However, one tends to, and perhaps Professor Toft, you can add as well, but one tends to, you use the word proxy, for example. So what comes to mind then is that territory, if territory is a proxy for resources, and let's say an invading army takes the hill next to my home, I have a reaction, a very negative reaction. I don't think, well, that will make it harder for me to forage for berries now. Let me find another strategy for berry accumulation. I just think I want these people off my land. Is that kind of a fair description of what we're talking about here?
Well, so this is Professor Toft talking. So I think Dom and I, how we put it in the paper, and we would say it just raises the risk. So if territory is involved, so it's interesting that when you said my land, right? And so there's just something about, we talk about residency status, we talk about who's lived there the longest, which organism, which human knows the territory, knows the land. And so, one of the core features of the argument is we say there's a higher risk when a piece of territory is the subject of contestation between the two organisms or between the two people. And so it's not that we're hardwired, and then even with the soft wiring that we talk about, all we're saying is that when territory is involved, it just means the risk is higher. There's a higher propensity for humans to sort of go all out and try to defend that territory, or to take it if they feel as if it were taken and they still are the rightful owners of it.
So let's take this and talk about this notion of evolutionary game theory here. How can this be used to help us? I mean, I was always struck. I was a little boy when the movie Exodus came out, and the theme song, the first line is, "This land is mine, God gave this land to me." That's how it begins. And then you have, you have Palestinian culture deeply steeped in the notion of the Nakba and the displacement from land and home. You have it in Chechnya. As you both cite in your paper, you have the situation that's taking place now with Ukraine and Crimea. So how could we potentially use these insights to deal with some of these seemingly intractable territorial conflicts?
So I'll start, and then Dom, do you want to take over? So I'll just explain how I came actually to this research. So Dom is trained as an evolutionary biologist, and I'm trained as a political scientist. And it's interesting because the couple of cases that you just talked about, RJ, involve nationalism and homelands. And so I came to this by way of looking at nationalism, and when it is that ethnic or ethnic groups or nations sort of fight over territories or fight over particular pieces of land. And so one of the things that we can help to understand is why is it that particular pieces of land are contested more so than others? So why is it, for example, that Russia most recently went after Crimea? And why is it that the Chechens for hundreds of years have been trying to expel sort of Moscow, trying to come out from underneath the Moscow yoke? And so what Dominic and I can do through this theorizing, using the game theory, using sort of the hawk-dove, and what we mean by hawk is, you're taking the offense, you're really fighting for the land, and the dove is sort of yielding and saying, you know what, maybe the other side is going to be able to contest it. And we have some conditions. It depends upon costs. It depends upon the sense of whether or not you're going to be able to actually win, be victorious in the fight. So we're not saying, cut and dry, but what we can do is point to particular parcels of land around the globe that are going to be contested much more so than other pieces of land.
So and then of course Professor Johnson will want to hear from you. But the one that always astonished me was the Falkland Islands. Here you had Great Britain, so many miles away, and Argentina fighting over this remarkably tiny piece of land. The cost seems so disproportionate to the land involved. Isn't symbolism a big piece of this as well?
Yeah, so that's a good topic and a good point to raise here, because as Monica said, what led us into this was partly the recognition that the literature trying to understand territorial conflicts had failed to some extent to explain both the prevalence of territorial conflict around the world and its severity. When it happens, it's very bloody. And people hadn't really been able to explain this other than sort of saying, well, there seems to be a sort of symbolic factor here which people place on territory. But that just begs the question, well, why do they place this heavy symbolism on territory? And evolutionary biology sort of suggests that that's not particularly puzzling, that it can be a good strategy to do that, to place a high value in the territory that you know and you own, and to fight for it to keep it. As soon as you come to a specific case like the Falklands, there's all sorts of historical and political and socioeconomic factors which come in. Lots of British people were surprised about that decision. We need Margaret Thatcher here to help us work out exactly what happened. But part of it is a bit like Crimea. It's about the people who live there and what they want. And in the case of the Falklands then and now, there's been an overwhelming demand among the people there to stay part of Britain, however crazy that looks from the map.
So you have this sort of endless fractionation. I mean, that's a principle we all admire, that self-determination, but then you have, for example, Ukraine versus Crimea, and you have Crimea per se versus the Tatars in Crimea and so on. So you have this, you could have this endlessly fractionating process of self-determination. I guess the question in our closing couple minutes or so is there a way this can be used to minimize or prevent conflicts in the future?
Well, I'll close with one point. I think it can. I think we can talk about sort of fractures on the globe. I mean, it's interesting if you look at the world. We do still see a proliferation of states. Back in the late 1940s, there were only about 50 or so states, and now we're upwards over 200. So the fracturing is still happening. It's happening less violently. The Soviet Union fell apart relatively peacefully, but I think it can help us to sort of mitigate and understand, to really fully appreciate the emotive power. I think we're advanced, we're modern. I mean, Kerry talked to the Secretary of State. Kerry talked about this is 20th or 19th century behavior, but to understand this emotive power behind territory and this compulsion for humans, for people, to say, no, this is my land and I'm going to fight for it. So just that awareness, I think, is helpful, and bringing that to the fore when these crises happen, and take it seriously.
And I think you're also saying, to a certain extent, respect it. That either side of a conflict can say, I understand you have a territorial reaction here, and I will take that into consideration in my handling of this going forward. I hope we've done justice to your topic and to your paper. Thanks so much for being with us, Professor Dominic Johnson and Professor Monica Toft. We really appreciate you coming on to discuss your paper.
Well, thank you. It's been fun.
Thanks very much.
You bet. I'm Richard Eskow, and we will be RJ Eskow, and we will be back after these messages to talk about the Hillary campaign in 2016 and the McCutcheon, more about the McCutcheon decision with Ryan Clayton of Wolfpack. So please stick with us. We've got a lot more to cover. I'm Richard Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.
You are listening to the We Act Radio Network, produced in Washington, D.C. Visit us online at weactradio.com or at youtube.com/weactradiodc.
I had a sore in my mouth that just wouldn't go away. And after a couple of weeks, I went to my doctor.
A sore, lump, or thick patch in your mouth or throat could be a symptom of oral cancer.
My doctor told me I was smart to come in. He said that oral cancer is more common in African American men than in any other group in the U.S. It turns out I did have oral cancer, but it was caught early and my treatment was successful. I'm glad I got it checked. That probably saved my life.
If you're an African American man, you need to know about oral cancer. Visit a doctor or dentist if you see changes in your mouth that don't go away after 2 weeks. It's important to get an oral cancer exam, because if you do have cancer, the earlier it's caught, the better. A message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health.
Jeff, I'm home.
Hey, Mom.
So, what did you do today? I noticed the dishes are still in the sink.
I've been busy.
Getting your taxes done like we talked about?
Oh, I got my friend Dave on that. Hey, he's only charging $20.
Not Dave from your high school class who graduated 3 years late.
Yeah, he's good with numbers. Won our fantasy football league last year.
Jeff, I can't believe you would actually take your...
Kidding, Mom. I took all my paperwork over to that preparer just like you recommended.
Using a paid tax preparer this year? Visit irs.gov for some do's and don'ts. Like, look for a preparer who has a preparer tax ID number and signs your return. Check out their qualifications and review your tax return before you sign it.
Oh, Jeff, why do you do this to me?
Mom, you're just so easy.
irs.gov. It's the best tax tip of all.
You know, this used to be a good neighborhood. Now it's a mess. You got all these polyps running around.
Colon cancer almost always starts with the polyp. Get the polyp early and stop colon cancer before it even starts.
Where do you think you were running to, huh? I didn't even see you guys there. I don't know.
Get the test, get the polyp,
I want to talk to my lawyer!
get the cure.
I got a phone call!
CD is for everybody, not just for the few. Anyone can share VD with someone nice as you.
If you're curious or confused, get information or a pamphlet at most pharmacies or a health clinic. If you need help, see a doctor.
Would you like to secure stable employment, affordable, high-quality child care, or an opportunity to serve your community through meaningful volunteer and internship experiences? If so, UPO is the place for you. Hello, I'm Andrea Thomas, Vice President of Administration and Chief of Staff for UPO. As the Community Action Agency for Washington, D.C., UPO has proudly served the residents of Washington for the past 50 years. Annually, we impact the lives of nearly 100,000 Washingtonians, 100,000 people advancing their education, securing employment, maintaining housing stability, and investing in their communities through volunteerism. Our vision is a Washington of thriving communities and self-sufficient residents. To learn more about our services and how you can partner with us or donate, visit us at www.upo.org. UPO, where we are uniting people with opportunities.
Well, that music can only mean one thing. I wonder what it is. No, what that music means is that we are back on the Zero Hour. I'm Richard Eskow, and we are covering today all our ramifications of the McCutcheon hearing and money in politics and evolutionary biology and how that's affecting the political process. And now we're going to talk a little bit about some Democrats. And joining us again is our friend Katie Gluck from Politico. Katie, thanks so much for being with us.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
Well, thanks for coming back. You know, I was kind of played a dirty trick on you last time asking I think I asked you if Rand Paul was intelligent and if you liked Ted Cruz personally. So I promise not to throw those dirty ones at you anymore.
Oh, thank you. Hopefully answered those questions safely. So.
Yeah, very, very. The word I would use is artfully.
Thank you.
So thanks for coming back. And listen, you wrote a couple pieces. I always enjoy reading your political coverage. You wrote a couple pieces that interested me a lot, and I wanted to chat with you about them. In one of them, you talked about Bill Clinton giving a talk in which he said that Democrats should, quote unquote, embrace even their more controversial policies and not back down from a fight.
That's right.
And tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, he, in an interview several weeks ago now, said that, as much as there are some kind of politically controversial issues out there, Democrats, especially when it is sort of suggesting that especially when it comes to health care, they should not shy away from kind of going to bat on those issues and sort of be clear on where the party is. And, of course, that's something that he demonstrated when he offered a very high-profile speech at the Democratic National Convention in 2012.
Okay, so and we'll pivot to your reporting in a minute. And I know you didn't conduct this interview. I think the only thing he mentioned in that interview was Obamacare. Did he mention any other unpopular policies?
At least from what we saw of that interview, speaking sort of generally about Democrats not shying away from a fight. But, of course, he did also point to that speech specifically in which he did talk about health care. And, of course, this comes as a lot of Democrats who are up for re-election this coming year, especially in redder states, are really trying to figure out what the best approach is for them to talk about a law that, they may support, they may stand by, but at the same time is more controversial in their states.
Well, I guess he must have been talking about Obamacare because, a lot of the other things that I personally wish Democrats would be stronger on, whether it's Social Security or Medicare or stimulus spending or whatever, are actually, most of them are pretty popular. So I didn't know where Bill was going here, but I found it relevant because of the piece you wrote about young Democrats.
Sure.
And Hillary Clinton, who, of course, is Bill's wife, as well as the leading contender. And I thought this was a really interesting piece because, you wrote your lead was they're ready for her, they're excited about her, they're planning their next career moves with her campaign in mind. So we're obviously talking about aspiring professional party people. And then you go on to say young Democrats have just one question. If Hillary Clinton runs for president, will she be ready to make room for them? So you talked to almost 20 current and former Democratic activists and operatives younger than 30. And so your finding was they're excited about Hillary. Is that right?
Absolutely. Lots of them are very excited about her. They are hopeful that she will run. Many also think that should she run, she's essentially going to be the only kind of really competitive game in town. And so they're hoping that they may be able to go work for her. But at the same time, for a variety of reasons that perhaps we'll get into, they are concerned that perhaps there wouldn't be as much room for them to work for her in a substantive way as there was in comparison to the Obama campaign, especially in 2008.
See, we definitely will get into that because I think this is really interesting dimension of all this. But before we do, I guess my question for you is, how do I put this? Why are they excited? And, I'm a Hillary skeptic myself, but I'm not asking it for that reason necessarily. Mm-hmm. I honestly don't know. Is the excitement just because she can win and they think she's a strong candidate, or is there something about Hillary personally that excites them?
Well, of course, depends on whom you ask, but a lot of people will say that they are excited about the prospect of working for potentially a highly competitive female candidate who, would have clearly a fighting chance at making it to the White House. So there's part of, there's that piece of it. She's also extremely popular across the board. Perhaps her numbers have come down a bit since she left the State Department, but, for her time in the Obama administration, poll after poll showed that generally she was quite popular, even perhaps in part across party lines. So you're seeing that continue to play out in some respects, and there are also those who do argue that she would be quite competitive in a general election should she run.
Okay, so that's a great answer. It makes perfect sense. And then we get to the part where they feel there might not be room for her. And this, I think, is a very interesting story because, first of all, in the 1992 election, which I remember being in town, being in Washington when that election was taking place, and then when Bill Clinton took office, really a lot of his key people were young, including, George Stephanopoulos was under 30, and, a lot of other younger people around that age, got their start with the Clinton administration, the first Clinton administration. Barack Obama's candidacy in 2008 certainly brought, your new folks up like David Plouffe and others. Age aside, it brought in a new group of people. And you did have some younger people like his speechwriter, John Favreau. But then Obama got elected and tapped a lot of the same Bill Clinton people to staff his administration. Hillary had used a lot of those 90s era Bill Clinton people to staff her campaign then, and of course infamously used Mark Penn to run it. We've seen stories saying that even the old operatives won't join her campaign if Penn's not running it. But that aside, are these young Democrats feeling, you have the super PACs that have been created for Hillary now, they're using a lot of the old 90s era Clinton folks. Do they feel that that Hillary isn't likely to make room for new talent in her team?
Well, I think whether she will or she won't is, certainly an open question at this point. We got to see if she runs first. But at the same time, what they would point to is that, kind of everything that you noted. If she runs, there are already at least two, really prominent super PACs that are laying the groundwork now. So that brings in, waves of people who would all, or many of whom would be looking to hop onto such a campaign. And in addition, you noted going back to 1992, but, even going back a step farther to her days in Arkansas, she has a whole sort of network of political relationships, that extend back decades. And, there are some people going as far back as their days in Arkansas all the way up through, her time at the State Department and now at the Clinton Foundation, some of whom, would also be looking to get perhaps onto such a campaign and, would have those relationships dating back far enough that some of these young people say, well, perhaps they would get kind of first pick at some of these top jobs. And so, it's a combination of sort of how early things are starting and the fact that, she does have such deep roots in politics that have sparked some to sort of say that perhaps this would be a highly crowded campaign, and to kind of wonder what upward mobility opportunities might look like, and even ahead of that, sort of how difficult it would be to hop onto such a campaign in the first place.
Well, and what kind of talent are we talking about? You talked to, roughly 20 folks. Are we talking general operatives? Are we talking a mix of like communications people and staff people and policy people? What kind of folks were they that you talked to?
It's really a range from, pretty young people who, maybe they did some time in 2012. Maybe they're going to be working some on midterms now, but, with like some experience, but are just kind of hoping that there would be the opportunity to have a full-time job in the 2016 cycle, to others who, maybe they were there in 2008, whether with her or with the president or elsewhere, and have been around the block a couple times at this point, and certainly that'll be the case in 2016, but are kind of wondering, about the extent to which there would be more substantive jobs available to them, especially if they don't have those kind of pre-existing ties to her world.
Well, last question. Did anybody tell you whether, let's say if they came out of the 2012 Obama campaign or even 2008, whether an Obama track record was a plus or a minus with the Hillary people, in their opinion?
I do think if you take a look at kind of some of the people behind these two groups, Priorities USA and Ready for Hillary, that are gearing up to kind of be in place should she run, and of course Ready for Hillary is designed to encourage her to run, you actually do see a lot of high-profile Obama alums who have made the switch over to kind of encouraging her to get in at this point.
So, okay, that's a great, interesting story, Katie. Thanks so much for talking about it, because, I think if we don't keep bringing up young people and advancing them, where do we get the talent base of the future when the Hillary people all retire, which will, is presumably happen someday. So, Katie Gluck, reporter for Politico, as always, thanks so much for being with us on the Zero Hour.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm RJ Eskow, and we will be right back after this. Don't go away, because remember, this is the Zero Hour.
Our children are exposed to violence every day, in their neighborhoods, in their schools, even in their own homes. Exposure to violence can have a devastating and lifelong impact. Through community action and leadership at the national level, we're identifying the children who need our help. I'm Attorney General Eric Holder, and I'm asking those of you who have a role in a child's life to take action. Through your attention and early intervention, we can help children in need to heal, to thrive. Together, we can change their lives and their futures.
Join the Justice Department in defending childhood.
100% success rate in modifying your home. Free consultation at 2%.
Does this sound familiar? If you're in need of assistance with your mortgage, be careful where you turn for help. Loan modification scammers will offer deals too good to be true. Learn the signs so your life won't be turned upside down. Know it, avoid it, report it. For more information or to report a scam, call 1-888-9950 or visit HUD.gov/prevent-loan-scams.
As a National Guard or Reserve member, you served your country. Now let VA serve you.
I wouldn't be here today as a successful woman without the help that I received.
Your VA honors your service by providing a wide range of veterans benefits. From home loans to job training, VA benefits can help with some of life's toughest challenges.
What's important about VA benefits is they don't just touch you as an individual. They can touch your parents, maybe your grandparents, your child.
Go to benefits.va.gov/guardreserve to learn more, including how to apply online using e-benefits.
I just finished a master's degree recently, and now I'm working on another degree as well. So the military made that all possible. My veterans benefits made that all possible.
No matter what the time is, apply for your benefits. You earn them. VA is ready to help you.
Achieve your next mission. Learn about and apply for your VA benefits today.
friends, David
Hello, this is Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and I want to tell you about my new favorite discovery, Yosemite National Park. I recently went there with my husband and children, and we walked the trails to see the breathtaking waterfalls, admired the grand meadows, and giant sequoias. But the future of our national parks is uncertain. Many challenges face our parks today, from polluted air and water to development threats outside their borders and inadequate funding to protect our national heritage. That's why the National Parks Conservation Association recently completed a decade-long assessment of the challenges facing our national parks, along with proposed actions that will ensure our children and grandchildren will be able to enjoy the parks as we have. Our national parks have inspired Americans for nearly 100 years. As we approach the centennial of the National Park Service in 2016, please join us in helping to protect our national park legacy. Find out how at www.mpca.org.
Hello, my name is Jim Gray, and I am a judge of the Superior Court in California and a former federal prosecutor in Los Angeles. I would like to talk to you for a moment about marijuana. Did you know that since the federal government first banned marijuana in 1937, usage in this country has actually gone up by about 4,000%? Or did you know that in the Netherlands, where adults are allowed to possess small amounts of marijuana and buy it from government-regulated businesses, fewer adults and fewer teenagers smoke marijuana than here in our country? Or that an American is arrested on marijuana charges every 38 seconds? If you are wondering if any of this makes sense, you are not alone. To find out more, contact the Marijuana Policy Project at 1-877-JOIN-MPP or visit them on the web at mpp.org. Thank you, and good luck to us all.
And we are back on the Zero Hour. And as you know, in this week's program, we've been talking a lot about the McCutcheon decision, which is part of a multi-stage program to allow money to absolutely dominate the political process instead of merely overwhelmingly dominate it, as it does today. And here to talk about that process with us and give us his own thoughts, as opposed to merely echoing my own, is Ryan Clayton, who's been very active on this topic. Ryan has been on the program before. He works with my friend Cenk Uygur on the Wolf PAC, which is designed to get money the hell out of politics. So, Ryan, how the heck are you?
Well, I'm fired up, man, and angry and pissed off and ready to do something about it. I'll tell you that.
Well, good, because you know what? I wish we had 320 million Americans who felt the same way, because they should.
Yeah, well, you know, about 97% of Americans, when polled, say they want to reduce the influence of corruption in politics. So there's really, you know, across ideological lines, across partisan lines, everybody wants something done about this. Now, only in the same similar poll, or the same poll, about 10% said that they think you can do anything about it. So that's really the gap that we gotta fix, is between that 10% out of the 97% that want something done about it, who actually think something can get done. That's why everybody else isn't taking action. And at Wolfpack, we have a plan to amend the Constitution and get big money out of politics, restore free and fair elections.
You know, I love the point you make about despair. I love that point, because I think that's critical. I think that the big money folks count on your despair. They want your despair. They cultivate your despair. Despair is part of their strategy. So we counteract. It's our job, all of us who oppose this and are in a position to articulate that. It's our job to fight that despair. Now, how are you fighting that despair? You got a constitutional amendment, right?
You know what gives me hope is strategy.
Ryan, did we lose you?
Some people say you want to go out and create awareness. They say you want to go out and, you know, recruit a whole bunch of people and have a whole bunch of meetings. And I'll just be honest with you. You know, we think people are really well aware enough that there's a huge problem and that we have to fix it. Now, how do you fix it, right? And what most people will answer to that question is you go to the people that are creating the problem, Congress or the Supreme Court, and wait on them to fix it. And that's what creates despair, is because the exact people responsible for the problem are the people that everybody's saying to go and ask them to fix it. You know, asking Congress to fix Congress is like asking cancer to cure cancer, right? You got a Congress with a 9% approval rating. That's lower than the King of England at the time, pundits on TV and the famous congressmen and women. You know, these people, if you sit down with them and with the state legislators, seeing great signs.
I really feel that McCutcheon clarifies our country's future, global future, but to me, this is the defining issue of the moment. To me, if we can't recapture the political process, we can't control corporations, we can't control the great wealth grab that's dominating the country, we can't protect the climate or the environment, because it's the same wealthy forces that are on the other side of this and that are using the government process to prevent us. So your strategy is, let's do it on the state level, but how does that work? In other words, can I use your PAC? Will it give me the tools to say to every state legislator that I vote for, state senator, whatever they might be, that I will not vote for you unless you pledge to support this constitutional amendment, for example?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd say on all those issues, you know, we've got the most corrupt Supreme Court in the history of this country. These people are traitors to American democracy. You know, Alito and Kennedy and Thomas and Roberts, these people are taking a wrecking ball to the separation of wealth and state in this country. And they're really doing, you know, they're undoing the work of the American Revolution, which was to reverse an aristocracy and put the country's government in the hands of the people. You know, they're reinstating a moneyed aristocracy of wealth in this country through all of these bad decisions. You know, with McCutcheon, it's just adding insult to injury. You've already taken down all the walls. You've already done all the damage. And now they're just pouring salt in the wound, saying even more money in the political process. And they're just so detached from the will of the American people. That's what gives me hope, because people are fired up and pissed off and ready to go and do something about it. And what we're doing is going down to the state level. What we do is we connect people together. We provide them with the tools. We operate as a primarily a decentralized organization where we give you the tools, you know the goal, you know, you can connect with the other people in your group and start training other people and start taking action, start calling your legislators and actually solve this problem. And the strategy we're using is how we got 4 out of the last 10 amendments to the Constitution. It's how we got the 17th Amendment to the Constitution, which they got within 1 or 2 states of calling for a convention to propose an amendment, and Congress capitulated and gave them that amendment. And it's also how we got the Bill of Rights. We got the Bill of Rights in New York and Virginia said, hey, we're going to call a convention to propose these amendments because we're going to get these amendments one way or another. And that's what we have to say to Congress right now. Most amendments to the Constitution start with exactly what Wolfpack is doing at the state level. And that's how I know we're going to win. And that's how, when we take those people, that 97% of people that want something done about this problem, that's how we're going to jack up that number from 10%, because our strategy actually works. It's got a historical basis of success. And if you want to participate in that victory, you should go to wolf-pack.com and join us.
Now, you said wolf-pack.com. Stupid question, but I'm going to ask it anyway because it popped into my head and I have no self-restraint, okay? And that is, have you guys recruited any celebrities for this? Because I would imagine this would be one where star power would help attract people to your cause. I mean, I don't know any. I mean, you have Jank, who's a megastar, but other than that, have you thought about?
A billion views on YouTube. He has, that's like Justin Bieber or Psy. You know, he's like the Walter Cronkite of YouTube. He has as many people listening to the Young Turks and the TYT network every month, as many progressives on YouTube listen to him every month, as conservatives listen to Rush Limbaugh on the radio. So, you know, we have a huge megaphone, and that's why I believe that with Jank's megaphone and his charismatic personality and his ability to really rile people up and point them to the solution, as well as the strategy that he discovered just looking at the history of how you amend the Constitution, that's the powerful mix. You know, we're driving people together online, we're connecting them with each other, we're providing them with the tools to make this happen, and they're doing it every day, you know? So as far as star power, man, it's built into the pie on this one with Jank and the Young Turks.
Well, you know, I'm charismatic too. No, I'm kidding.
I hope you're signed up, man.
I'm a little charismatic. Listen, it's great to have you on the show, Ryan. Keep up the great work. It's wolf-pack. That's wolf, like hungry like the wolf. wolf-pack.com. Ryan Clayton, let's get the money out of politics. Let's fix this corrupt system once and for all. What do you say?
Hell yeah, man. Let's get free and fair elections once again in this country. That's what every American wants. Thanks for having me on the show today.
You bet. Thanks for coming on. I'm RJ Eskow, and we will be back in the next hour. We'll be talking about expanding Social Security, the misleading climate information coming out of Nate Silver and other sources, and what's going on at the state level. Let's take our democracy back. I'm RJ Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour.
I'm Gary Johnson, former governor of New Mexico. Last year, my state became the 12th state to allow medical use of marijuana by patients who are seriously ill. Some people were surprised that a Republican governor supports medical marijuana, but I'm hardly alone. Groups like the American College of Physicians, American Nurses Association, and American Public Health Association have all acknowledged the medical value of marijuana. New research about medical marijuana is coming out almost every day, showing remarkable potential in all sorts of serious conditions, including cancer, AIDS, and chronic pain. But some in government still want to put politics and ideology ahead of public health. To learn more about medical marijuana and what you can do to help, contact the Marijuana Policy Project at 1-877-JOIN-MPP or visit them on the web at mpp.org. Thanks.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
If you work 60 hours a week and help earn millions for your employer, do you have a job?
I'm Lily Ledbetter, and this is a Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
Not if you play college football at a big-time program where you average 60-hour work weeks at summer training camp and 50 hours a week beginning in September. Your pay is your scholarship, but you'd best not get hurt or develop an undue competing interest in academics or raise questions about concussions and injuries. Because if you lose your position, you may well lose your scholarship and be forced out of college and be left with nothing, with no rights to contest any of that. But football players at Northwestern University recently won a ruling at the National Labor Relations Board which gives them the right to bargain with their employer about health care and injuries and other conditions of employment. But the NLRB only has jurisdiction over private employers. Public universities with state employees, think UCLA and the universities of Alabama or Texas, are governed by their state's labor laws and not the National Labor Relations Act. And of course, Northwestern and the NCAA have vowed to appeal and appeal and appeal. The First Amendment guarantees people who share collective concerns the right to associate and to speak with one voice. That's why Northwestern's College Athletes Players Association should be able to speak for its members, and why we call ourselves the American Civil Liberties Union.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
Yo, you already know what it is, what it was, what it do. It's your boy Cyrus the Virus, aka the livest animated rapper out here in the DC area, man. Down here on Georgia Avenue, Northwest, Washington, DC, at We Act Radio. Do something, please.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. Reuben Jones is one of the millions of American workers who make minimum wage. He was nearly overcome with emotion at a press conference in Washington, D.C. Thursday as the Give America a Raise bus tour ended its 11-state journey pushing for an increase in the minimum wage.
For 5 years, I never got a raise. I never had a chance to go out. I got 2 children and 4 grandchildren. I can't even visit them. I can't visit them at all. I don't have the money to do it. I work every day hard. Excuse me. One day, I was coming home from work from Largo. It was raining. Train stopped running at 11:30. I get to the subway at 11 o'clock, thinking that the train was still running. I get to the train station, the train is gone. Don't have no money to get home from Largo, from D.C. to D.C., so I had to walk. And then I had to go back to work the next day, tired. I do everything in that job that I possibly can. For me to work like this, to be treated like this, it's a shame. Thank you. Please, the people that hear me now, today, please raise the minimum wage. We all need it. We all need it. Please. Thank you.
Most jobs in America, roughly 81 million, pay less than $20 an hour, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. At least 18 million of those jobs pay less than the $10.10 an hour that Democrats, labor, and progressive organizations say should be the nation's absolute minimum wage. AFL-CIO Secretary-Treasurer Liz Schuler.
Working people are on the move. Working people are on the move. And it's women and men, and whether they're union or non-union, they're coming together and they're saying the same thing, that people are working hard, but they're not able to make ends meet. Wages have been stagnant despite productivity going up and despite soaring corporate profits. And that is not fair. So a higher minimum wage, as well as reform to allow more collective bargaining, right, is critical. People get it. They live it. And they want Congress to do something about it. They want Congress to act and act now. It really cuts to the core of the struggle of millions of workers around this country. And that's why the labor movement is mobilizing. Labor movement is mobilizing in cities and towns across the country with coalition partners because it has been too long since America has stood together to raise wages and claim that American dream again.
The Dream Action Coalition says it's escalating activities calling for immigration reform and an end to deportations. Erica Andiola, co-director of the Dream Action Coalition, says families of those deported and in detention will make themselves heard at the White House.
That's what we're here to say to the president. We are going to stay outside of your house. We're going to stay outside of your door, your window, until you stop the deportation of our families.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Coleman Lowndes. In the wake of another tragic shooting at Fort Hood, conservative pundits were quick to blame gun regulations and Democrats for not allowing soldiers to carry guns on military bases. On Fox & Friends, co-host Steve Doocy made this claim.
Now, keep in mind, it was back, I believe it was during the Bill Clinton administration, where they decided that men and women on base shouldn't be able to carry arms, even though they're trained professionals.
As the New Republic explained, it was a 1992 DoD directive issued under former President George H.W. Bush that established the rules limiting firearms on military bases. Bill Clinton didn't take office until January 1993. On Fox's America's News HQ, retired four-star General Jack Keane pushed back on that idea and explains why, in practice, arming servicemen and women on bases is not a good idea.
Can you imagine the first responders coming on a scene and there's people shooting all over the place and they have to determine who is friend and who is foe? The soldiers, they do know how to defend themselves, but they're not policemen. They are not trained to control a violent situation and de-escalate it.
For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
This is The Zero Hour with RJ Eskow, produced by the We Act Radio Network in Washington, D.C., and broadcast across the nation. Visit us online at thisisthezerohour.com or at youtube.com/thezerohour. Ladies and gentlemen, RJ Eskow.
I'm Richard Eskow. We are back, and this certainly is The Zero Hour. I'm getting a little feedback in the headset here. If we can do something about that, I think it's gone now. Okay, this is The Zero Hour, and this week's sign of that is the McCutcheon ruling, another step in the Supreme Court's hijacking of political democracy. You know, this is a conspiracy, and I don't hesitate to use the word conspiracy, that goes back to 1970 at least, and future Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell's memo to the corporate world, to the wealthy, on how to seize and take control of the political process, to the Federalist Society, which trained a generation of lawyers on how to distort, in my opinion, and I think well-grounded, distort the law and the Constitution on behalf of corporate and high net worth sponsors. This is the same kind of court, the same majority, the same plurality that hijacked democracy openly and blatantly in Bush versus Gore, even going so far as to say this decision is not a precedent. We just want our guy in. That's the court. That's what they did. And what's really striking about this decision is how strongly it goes against public opinion. Let's look at some of the figures on that, because I think it's important. 79% of those polled in one study support limiting the amounts of funds that political candidates can raise and spend. 79%. Virtually, 4 out of 5 Americans. 71% believe the candidate with most money wins. Hello. That's almost always the case. And despite the fact that nobody's out there advocating public financing of elections, which they should, a Gallup poll showed that it already has the idea of 50% of the voters more support it than are against it. There's a lot more statistics on that. Instead, look, we've got a government that's not working for the people, and they know it. Economically, 57% of Americans think upper income people pay less than their fair share in taxes, and they're right. 66%, 2/3 say the richest 2% should pay more in taxes. The richest 0.1% should pay a lot more. 73% believe corporations pay too little in taxes, and they're right. 69% believe that corporate loopholes for meals and entertainment should be eliminated. On and on and on and on. We've got a situation where the government is not respecting the public's views. The government is for sale. The Supreme Court is making it worse. There was another story that I just want to mention to you guys right now. It was an anecdote in the New York Times. Corporate lobbyists assail tax overhaul they once cheered. Now, there are a lot of quotes from different people here, but the one that caught my eye is, first, the New York Times writes, lobbyists say they have to be zealous because the tax code hits almost every corporate interest. They make millions, lobbyists do, jury-rigging the tax code on behalf of their corporate clients. But here's the quote. Here's the money quote in all of this. If you are not at the table, you are on the menu, says Heather Podesta, a lobbyist whose firm Heather Podesta and Partners has at least 10 tax-related corporate clients. Now, Heather Podesta is very networked in with the Democratic Party. Of course, there are many, many lobbyists on the Republican side as well, but there are many on the Democratic side. It's where you go when you leave politics, for example, or when you know a lot of Democratic politicians. Heather Podesta has been the wife of Democratic super lobbyist Tony Podesta, whose brother John Podesta worked for the Clinton administration and then headed the Obama administration's transition team. Now, Tony Podesta and Heather Podesta are divorcing, which the salacious details of their divorce do not interest me. But what does interest me, because you should know about this, is the enormous amount of wealth that's, I don't care about the other men or whatever. It's the enormous amount of wealth being contested in the Podesta divorce that offers us a glimpse into the world of the super lobbyists. Their multi-million-dollar home in Calorama, which is a very nice section of Washington, D.C. The Heather and Tony Podesta collection of art, which is extremely valuable. The multiple homes, the other forms of assets and wealth. It goes on and on and on. So look, it doesn't matter to me their personal lives, but what matters is that we have a situation, here's a salient note here. Tony Podesta filed for divorce, accused his wife of 11 years of misleading him about the possibility of their reconciling when he paid half the down payment on a multi-million-dollar home for her last March. There are the multiple multi-million-dollar homes, the different assets that these people have. Why? Because they know people who are in what is euphemistically and used to be honestly known as, quote-unquote, government service. You don't think we need to get the money out of politics? Hundreds of millions are being made by lobbyists every year. You don't think we need to get the money out of politics? As Heather Podesta says, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Are you at the table? Am I at the table? You don't think we need to get the money out of politics? This is a corrupt system. It needs to be fixed. If it isn't fixed, we can't fix the environment. We can't fix climate change. We can't fix economic inequality. We can't fix the growing militarism of our society and the invasion and destruction of our civil liberties. We can't fix any of it unless we get the money out of politics, and we can't get the money out of politics until we change the system. So I urge all of you to do that, to reject politicians who buy into this corporate system. I'm RJ Eskow, and you can be sure that this is the Zero Hour.
If you're planning to replace your Social Security card simply because you don't have it, you may not need to replace it at all. What's most important is that you remember your Social Security number. Remember during school how you memorized information and answers for tests? In the same way, you should memorize your Social Security number. Knowing your number is important, but having the card may not be. If you really do need to get a replacement card to show to an employer, it's easy to apply for a new one. Find out how at www.socialsecurity.gov/SS number.
Sergeant Michelle Garcia served meritoriously in Iraq and has the medals to prove it. Soon after leaving the Navy, Lieutenant Chris Scott found a job, a home, and started a family of his own. Corpsman Richard Stokely took the skills he learned in Vietnam and put them to good use as a paramedic. But soon after leaving the military, each of these veterans fell on hard times and faced homelessness. Even after Michelle lost all her savings, even after Chris wasn't able to pay his mortgage, and even after Richard battled alcoholism for years, they each reached out for help when they needed it most. A simple phone call put them in touch with a trained professional from the Department of Veterans Affairs. That call got Michelle a place to stay until she could afford one of her own, put Chris in touch with employment assistance, and found Richard a substance abuse program. These veterans are success stories not only for how they were able to help others while serving their country, but for how they were able to let others help them. If you know of or are a veteran in need, make the call.
Packers,
Vikings,
Red State,
Blue State.
We come from different places.
Uptown,
Downtown.
We come to different conclusions.
half empty,
Half full.
But no matter how different we are, we're all connected, and we can all make a difference. That's why United Way brings people, expertise, and resources together to improve the education, income, and health of our communities, the building blocks for a better life. When we live united, our efforts, magnified by others, add up to real change. Children succeed in school, families gain financial stability, the health of our neighbors improves, and suddenly, so do our communities. But real change won't happen without you.
Live united.
So let's look beyond our differences.
Live united.
One by one, let's make a difference. Let's reach out a hand to one and influence the condition of all.
Live united.
Give, advocate, volunteer. Live United. Sign up today at liveunited.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
This entire piece of music was played with only two instruments, a right hand and a left hand. Hands can do incredible things, but nothing compares to using them to help save a life with hands-only CPR. If an adult suddenly collapses, call 911, then push hard and fast in the center of their chest until help arrives. Hands-only CPR is recommended by the American Heart Association, and it's incredibly easy and effective. For more information on hands-only CPR and to make your own hand symphony track, visit handsonlycpr.org today. The power to help save a life is in your hands. A message from the American Heart Association and the Ad Council.
And we are back on the Zero Hour. In this segment, we are going to be talking about Social Security and specifically about expanding it. Our next guest is Max Richmond, who is president of the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. He has a very distinguished background, 16-year veteran of Capitol Hill, one of the nation's most influential senior advocacy and education membership organizations is his, the NCP-SSM. He has drafted legislation to establish a consumer price index for the elderly, which is an excellent idea. He's a frequent commentator, frequently interviewed on these topics. And Max, until I read your biography, I did not know that you are a graduate of Georgetown University Law School, as is my daughter. But thank you for coming on the program.
Well,
thank you for inviting me, and I guess I'm in good company if I'm a graduate along with your daughter.
And so is she. Thank you for saying that. And listen, you've been working now on the issue. We've seen a big shift in the whole. We've both been working on the Social Security issue for some time. You much more prominently and in a much more focused way. But we've certainly seen a shift in the battle in the last year or so, haven't we?
Yes, we have, and I think, Richard, I think we've had some major successes in the last year. We, as you know, opposed a plan that was concocted by the White House and the leadership, Republican leadership in the Congress, that would have essentially cut Social Security by changing the COLA formula, the change CPI that we've both talked and written about. And it was assumed for quite a while that this was going to get through because the president was behind it. It looked like that the Congress was going to accept it, and the American people spoke. And that proposal, for the time being, is not moving anywhere. So I consider that a big accomplishment. A lot of groups were involved in that. A lot of key members of Congress were involved in that effort, particularly Senator Bernie Sanders and Keith Ellison and the other members of the Progressive Caucus.
Well, absolutely. And as a result, now the conversation has shifted. And I would characterize it, but I'm curious to know whether you would agree. I would say, in a sense, the debate has shifted from one of defense to one of offense on Social Security.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah. So instead of fighting and resisting this change CPI cut, we're actually talking about how to how to expand the program and its benefits. And I know you guys have come out in support of the Harkins-Sanchez bill. Tell us a little bit about that, if you would, please.
Well, we have embarked on a campaign. We refer to it as Boost Social Security Now, and that's the name of the website as well for this campaign. And you're right. We have been playing defense for quite some time now, and there are some who were reluctant to shift the nature of the battle and start playing offense. But we need to begin, and we have with this campaign, talk about efforts to really reflect the growing public support to expand Social Security. That's why we have endorsed Senator Harkin's proposal S567 and a companion in the House, H.R. 3118, Congresswoman Linda Sanchez's bill, that improves Social Security. It does so in a number of ways. First of all, the cost of living adjustment issue that we've been talking about, instead of fighting a chain CPI that would have reduced the COLA, would reduce benefits over time pretty dramatically. This legislation would employ a more accurate consumer price index measure for the COLA, and it's called a CPIE, Consumer Price Index for the elderly. There is a component of the legislation that raises the minimum benefit by $70 a month. It's phased in over a couple of years.
So before we move off the cost of living or COLA adjustment, I just want our listeners to understand that this debate was essentially the change CPI would change the way that figure is calculated and make the increases along with the cost of living lower, by basically saying if people are buying cheaper goods, they can't buy meat anymore, whatever, then the benefit goes down. And what you're proposing and many of our groups are proposing in terms of the CPI for the elderly is that, in fact, cost of living has been rising more steeply for the elderly because they use things like transportation and health care that have been historically rising at a greater level, right? That's a fair summary?
Exactly, Richard. You explained it beautifully. You know what? Our position is if a cost of living adjustment if the purpose of a cost of living adjustment for Social Security beneficiaries is to make sure beneficiaries don't lose ground because of inflation, then we need to have the most accurate measure possible. And in order to do that, those folks at the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Department of Commerce need to look at the kinds of goods and services that seniors rely on and put the proper weight on that market basket of goods and services, and not what they do now, which is rely on how inflation is impacting a wage earner. The current formula, it's not as bad as the chain CPI, but it also is flawed because it does not focus on the buying patterns of seniors on Social Security. It focuses on the buying patterns of wage earners. So, we were looking at the possibility of going from a flawed formula, the current one, to an even more flawed formula, the chain CPI. What the legislation that Senator Harkin and Linda Sanchez in the House have proposed is would move us towards a more accurate measure of inflation and apply that to the COLAs that seniors so much rely on. And finally, the last thing I wanted to make a point of is how are we going to pay for all this? Having a larger COLA, having a higher minimum benefit, we're going to pay for it and extend the life of Social Security, which is in no danger, by the way, any immediate danger, but extend it even beyond 20 years that the trustees talk about, by lifting the payroll tax cap, the limit on FICA contributions. This is something we have at the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare have been engaged in for quite a long time, but now there is actual legislation that would raise that cap again in a gradual way, which will bring more money into the program, pay for additional benefits. We would go beyond some of the legislation, and we think there's a growing need for some other improvements in benefits that would be paid for by lifting the payroll tax cap.
So right now, if someone is earning up to $100, I think it adjusts over time, but I think right now it's about $117,000.
That's correct.
If you're earning under that amount, you're paying the payroll tax on your full earnings. But if you're earning $1 million a year, you're only paying it on roughly 10% of your income, and that's what this would change.
That's what this would change. And I think there are a lot of ways this could be done. There are proposals that would keep it at the current limit. It changes a little bit every year, but keep the cap on the current track and then start again collecting FICA tax at $250 or $300. Some members of Congress think that politically that may be more feasible to accomplish. But the point is, there are ways to extend. We often hear about Social Security being broke. That's not true. It has a surplus, is able to pay everybody every penny they're entitled to for the next 20 years. At that point, there's a shortfall that needs to be addressed, and we acknowledge that. But the way to do it is to bring more revenue into the program in a fair way, and not to cut benefits or raise the retirement age. And you just gave the example. Why should someone that's making $117,000 or anything below that pay FICA tax on all their wages, but someone who's making $1 million or $10 million or $100 million not pay a little bit more on their payroll, on their wages, to bring more money into the program?
So in the minute or so we have left, these are excellent proposals that I think most of us support. Polls show most Americans support. How good are the chances? You've been around Washington a long time. What are the prospects for the Harkin proposal?
I would be surprised if anything could be passed in the House and the Senate of this nature and signed by the president this close to an election. I think this is a campaign that's going to go on for a while. I think it will become an issue in some congressional races, and it is more likely that we'll have some traction and probably some modifications of Senator Harkin's bill. Of course, sadly, he won't be in the Congress anymore. He's retiring this year. But there are plenty of members of Congress who will take up that cause. I've spent some time recently with the two senators from Hawaii, Senator Schatz and Senator Begich of Alaska, and they're committed to a improved, expanded Social Security program and social insurance safety net. So I think this is something that we're going to hopefully get some traction on during the rest of this congressional session and get some action next year.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and updating us on this. Max Richmond is the president of the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. Max, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, RJ, for inviting me.
You bet. And we will be back after this break talking with a climate scientist about deceptions on climate change and talking with Carolyn Fiddler about interesting, unusual, and intriguing action at the state legislature level. We will be right back. I'm Richard Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.
You are listening to the We Act Radio Network, produced in Washington, D.C. Visit us online at weactradio.com or at youtube.com/weactradiodc.
I had a sore in my mouth that just wouldn't go away. And after a couple of weeks, I went to my doctor.
A sore, lump, or thick patch in your mouth or throat could be a symptom of oral cancer.
My doctor told me I was smart to come in. He said that oral cancer is more common in African American men than in any other group in the U.S. It turns out I did have oral cancer, but it was caught early and my treatment was successful. I'm glad I got it checked. That probably saved my life.
If you're an African American man, you need to know about oral cancer. Visit a doctor or dentist if you see changes in your mouth that don't go away after 2 weeks. It's important to get an oral cancer exam because if you do have cancer, the earlier it's caught, the better. A message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health.
Jeff, I'm home.
Hey, Mom.
So, what did you do today? I noticed the dishes are still in the sink.
I've been busy.
Getting your taxes done like we talked about?
Oh, I got my friend Dave on that. Hey, he's only charging $20.
Not Dave from your high school class who graduated 3 years late.
Yeah, he's good with numbers. Won our fantasy football league last year.
Jeff, I can't believe you would actually take your...
Kidding, Mom. I took all my paperwork over to that preparer just like you recommended.
Using a paid tax preparer this year? Visit irs.gov for some do's and don'ts. Like look for a preparer who has a preparer tax ID number and signs your return. Check out their qualifications and review your tax return before you sign it.
Oh, Jeff, why do you do this to me?
Mom, you're just so easy.
irs.gov. It's the best tax tip of all.
You know, this used to be a good neighborhood. Now it's a mess. You got all these polyps running around. Speaking of the devil.
Colon cancer almost always starts with the polyp. Get the polyp early and stop colon cancer before it even starts.
Where do you think you were running to, huh? I didn't even see you guys there. I don't know.
Get the test, get the polyp,
I want to talk to my lawyer!
get the cure.
I got a phone call!
CD is for everybody, not just for the few. Anyone can share VD with someone nice as you.
If you're curious or confused, get information or a pamphlet at most pharmacies or a health clinic. If you need help, see a doctor.
Would you like to secure stable employment, affordable, high-quality child care, or an opportunity to serve your community through meaningful volunteer and internship experiences? If so, UPO is the place for you. Hello, I'm Andrea Thomas, Vice President of Administration and Chief of Staff for UPO. As the Community Action Agency for Washington, D.C., UPO has proudly served the residents of Washington for the past 50 years. Annually, we impact the lives of nearly 100,000 Washingtonians, 100,000 people advancing their education, securing employment, maintaining housing stability, and investing in their communities through volunteerism. Our vision is a Washington of thriving communities and self-sufficient residents. To learn more about our services and how you can partner with us or donate, visit us at www.upo.org. UPO, where we are uniting people with opportunities.
And we are back on the Zero Hour. As you know, we are deeply concerned about the environment here on the Zero Hour, as any rational person would be. And in order to stay abreast of that subject, we want to now speak with Dr. John Abraham. Dr. Abraham is a professor at the University of St. Thomas. You may remember, regular listeners will remember, that a couple weeks ago we expressed some concerns on the program about the Nate Silver model of data journalism and how that might invite misunderstanding, misrepresentation, and so on, as if to prove us right. Not long after that, a very misleading climate science piece was written, which Dr. Abraham has very effectively debunked in a piece for the Huffington Post and elsewhere. But I also wanted to talk to him in a little bit about his overall work. Dr. Abraham is a climate scientist. He writes for The Guardian UK on energy and climate. And in 2012, he and his colleagues formed the Climate Science Rapid Response Team, and he also co-founded the Climate Science Legal Defense Fund. So, Professor Abraham, thanks so much for being with us.
Well, thanks so much for having me on. And I got to tell you, listening to that intro, you did predict the Roger Pielke disaster with Nate Silver's new website, and I wonder if you have any other stock market predictions that I could tap into, or some sports predictions. So, who's going to win the NCAA tournament? That's what I want to know.
The coaches.
Yeah, the coaches and the coffers of the universities.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to follow the money. That's right. How this stuff works. I'm 2 for 2 now. Yeah. So listen, but no, let's talk about Pielke first. But the reason, what I predicted, just so you know, is I'm not saying I knew all the details, but I have great concern that this notion of impartiality. First of all journalism should be data journalism. So to me, it's a slightly silly phrase, but also, what is data journalism? Why do you even feel the need to say that? You're posing yourself as somehow above certain biases that others have, which, without going on too much of a tangent, becomes a bias of its own. You become a professional contrarian. And I think the professional contrarians together, what's a way to distinguish yourself from the pack on climate science when there's a consensus about what's going on to our planet, is by challenging the consensus. And that was part of my concern and part of my prediction.
So let me just flesh that out a little bit. There's been a number of studies that have looked at how well scientists understand climate change. In fact, I've got one that's going to be published next week, which is going to be a blockbuster in the science world. But a number of studies have shown, scientists really agree. We've known what's happening to the globe for a long time, and we can predict it with reasonable accuracy. And knowing the future should help us make decisions now. I mean, I'm not an advocate for certain solutions, except that I'm an advocate for smart solutions. I mean, I'll tell you what, we've got a problem, and I don't care what solution we come up with to solve the problem. I want us to act on something, and I want it to be effective. Now, scientists have been saying that, but there's a group of people who, they're contrarians. They say, now hold on a second, we really don't think the climate's warming, or we don't know enough to act. Let's just wait. And what we need, or better yet, let's wait till the scientists prove it. with beyond a reasonable doubt. But let's think about how we take action in our daily lives. I mean, do you have fire insurance in your house, Richard?
Of course.
Of course you do. Do you have driver's insurance, car insurance? Of course you do. You don't think you're going to get in a car accident today, or you don't think you're going to get in a fire, but the consequences would be great, even though the likelihood is small. Well, the consequences to our Earth are incredibly great if the scientists are right, and we're pretty sure we're right. I mean, there is a small chance that we're wrong, a very, very small chance. But what do you do? How do you take action in a situation where you have a large likelihood of a negative consequence? Well, I think you do something about it. I mean, if you get diagnosed with cancer, and there's a 5% chance it will be benign, it'll become benign and won't cause you problems, and there's a 95% chance it'll kill you, the common sense person would take action.
Right, and the only thing I would do to invert your analogy, which is a good one, is that I've got fire insurance, even though it's very unlikely my house will burn. The better analogy here is everybody's telling me the house is burning already.
Yeah, that's right.
And
that's right.
It feels hot in here, but geez, one guy says, maybe you just turned up the heat too high. Oh, fine, I'll just go back to sleep. I mean, isn't that in a way a better analogy?
Well, I got to tell you what, you got to come travel the country and do interviews with me because you're a professional. Wait a second, you are a professional at this. I mean, your analogy is better. The firemen are standing outside saying your house is on fire. Let's take action now to limit the damage.
Right.
And then there's 1 or 2%, maybe there's some drunks walking home from the bar saying, wow, we don't think it's a big deal, or yeah, you turned up your heat. Who are you going to listen to? What is the prudent choice to take action now to limit cost to us in the future?
Right. So why, and this is, you will recognize a rhetorical question when you hear one, why would there be such resistance to a message that is virtually universally accepted by climate science? I got my answer. What's yours? Why are you guys, I mean, for example, I don't imagine when you originally decided to study climate science that someday you would find yourself feeling you needed to start a climate science legal defense fund. I don't think you felt you would be up against that kind of barrier. What happened?
Well, I actually started in thermal sciences doing biomed and working for the aerospace industry. So I wasn't even a climate scientist, and then I learned the science. I got a PhD in heat transfer and fluid flow, and I said, wait a second, we have a problem. So I actually moved into climate science because I recognized that we have a problem. But I'll tell you what, I do all of my science without pay. So I'm a professor, and all the research that I do is unfunded because I don't want anyone to accuse me, even though it's unjustified, to accuse me of doing this for the money. I actually pay to do this work. But why is there such a resistance? Well, part of it is because there's a lot of vested interests. I mean, if you think about the last election cycle, something like $275 million was spent on ad campaigns promoting things like clean coal or clean fuels and the petroleum industry. And it's because they have a lot of money at stake in ensuring that we don't revitalize our energy sector and create clean energy right here in the United States. And part of it is, there's another part of it that's more psychological. There's a group of people in the United States and elsewhere who have a resistance to collective action. They say, let's just each do our own thing. Let's not work together on a common problem. And for listeners out there, I'd encourage you to read Naomi Oreskes, Oreskes book, Merchants of Doubt, where she looks at the last 5-decade history of various vested interests fighting against tobacco legislation, fighting against acid rain, and now climate change. So there's this whole history of action to limit our ability to react to climate change, and let's hope that that's going to change and change fast.
And by the way, those guys have no compunction about working together. They work together all the time. The Koch Industries brothers are always bringing people together in Palm Springs and elsewhere for conclaves about how to collaborate on a number of issues, including climate science.
They actually many of these groups intimidate scientists. So they issue frivolous FOIA requests. FOIA sounds anonymous or benign. It's Freedom of Information Act. But basically, the requests for all internal communication from scientists So imagine that every day or two you got a request saying release all of your emails in the past year that had the word climate in them. Well, and imagine that you were told to release all your computer data, which you developed yourself and is your proprietary property. Well, even if a scientist agrees to go along with all of these, they have to spend all of their time reacting to these FOIAs and not doing research. So one way to shut down a scientist, like Mike Mann, a famous scientist who had this happen to him, is issue FOIA requests incessantly so they can't get any work done. And that's why
they also make their lives extremely, and he's a good example of that from what I recall, make a scientist's life extremely unpleasant by making them a target of public attacks, whether it's on Fox News or whatever it might be. They have an enormous noise machine to say, this is a guy who's deceiving you, and the hockey stick, which is controversial, whatever it may be, that it can be a rough ride out there for climate scientists
who tell the truth. It can be a rough ride.
Can it?
Some of us, we're comfortable enough to take that rough ride, but what about an upcoming scientist who's thinking about this as a career, a female or male scientist who's saying, do I want to get into this? Do I want to get into a career where my own research is going to make me a victim of public scorn or public attack? I mean, for me, I don't care. It's sort of funny. Every time I get a mailing with a bunch of typos, I know it's from one of these crazy folks. But for young scientists, they may take a second thought about going into this, and that's really a travesty.
Well, it certainly is, because we need all the research we can get. And, we really didn't get much of a chance to talk about Roger Pielke, but, people can Google John Abraham and Roger, Pielke. You take them apart, so there's no real need to talk more about that. But, I just want to end with, okay, I have this metaphor, and I want you to know if it's a valid metaphor. When I was a kid, there was a show called The Outer Limits. And in that show, a bunch of people got together to create a planetary threat of aliens. So they artificially stage an alien invasion so that the world will come together. Well, we've got a planetary threat, but now it's almost as if a lot of these well-funded interests are doing deals with the aliens instead of protecting the planet. So how do we get people? Am I overstating the case to say we have a planetary threat?
No, we have a severe planetary threat, and I'll say this. The actions that we take now will decide whether the threat makes it extremely difficult to handle the problem and costs a lot of money and a lot of lives, or whether it becomes a moderate problem. If we take action right now, we will lower the human and financial costs in the future. And that's the issue in a nutshell. Now, I know we're getting close to the end of our spot here, so I will mention, you mentioned it earlier, I'll remind your readers, listeners, that we set up this Climate Science Legal Defense Fund, or CSLDF, and what we do is we take donations and we actually pay scientists to defend themselves. So when they're sued for people who want to stop their research, we actually hire the attorneys and we give them free legal counsel to try to defend themselves. And it's one of the things we're trying to do to make it easier to be a scientist today in 2014.
And where can people go to learn more about that and maybe help out?
If you just Google CSLDF, that's CSLDF for Climate Science Legal Defense Fund, you'll find us. And it's a great, we don't take any money, but we're just paying to defend other scientists when they're legally attacked. It's a very worthwhile cause.
Well, it sounds like you don't take any crap either, and that's good.
No, we
so
don't.
I hope you'll come back and talk to us again, because you're doing really important work, and this is a critical struggle. So I hope we'll be able to call on you from time to time about it.
Anytime. It was my pleasure. Thanks so much.
You bet. Thanks for coming on the program. I'm Richard Eskow, and we will be right back after this. As Dr. Abraham made clear, this is the Zero Hour.
Our children are exposed to violence every day, in their neighborhoods, in their schools, even in their own homes. Exposure to violence can have a devastating and lifelong impact. Through community action and leadership at the national level, we're identifying the children who need our help. I'm Attorney General Eric Holder, and I'm asking those of you who have a role in a child's life to take action. Through your attention and early intervention, we can help children in need to heal, to thrive. Together, we can change their lives and their futures.
Join the Justice Department in defending childhood.
100%
100% success rate in modifying free consultations at 2%.
Does this sound familiar? If you're in need of assistance with your mortgage, be careful where you turn for help. Loan modification scammers will offer deals too good to be true. Learn the signs so your life won't be turned upside down. Know it, avoid it, report it. For more information or to report a scam, call 1-888-995-HOPE or visit HUD.gov/prevent loan scams.
As a National Guard or Reserve member, you served your country. Now let VA serve you.
I wouldn't be here today as a successful woman without the help that I received.
Your VA honors your service by providing a wide range of veterans benefits. From home loans to job training, VA benefits can help with some of life's toughest challenges.
What's important about VA benefits is they don't just touch you as an individual. They can touch your parents, maybe your grandparents, your child.
Go to benefits.va.gov/guard-reserve to learn more, including how to apply online using e-benefits.
I just finished a master's degree recently, and now I'm working on another degree as well. So the military made that all possible. My veterans benefits made that all possible.
No matter what the time is, apply for your benefits. You earn them. VA is ready to help you.
Achieve your next mission. Learn about and apply for your VA benefits today.
Friends, David
Hello, this is Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and I want to tell you about my new favorite discovery, Yosemite National Park. I recently went there with my husband and children, and we walked the trails to see the breathtaking waterfalls, admired the grand meadows, and giant sequoias. But the future of our national parks is uncertain. Many challenges face our parks today, from polluted air and water to development threats outside their borders and inadequate funding to protect our national heritage. That's why the National Parks Conservation Association recently completed a decade-long assessment of the challenges facing our national parks, along with proposed actions that will ensure our children and grandchildren will be able to enjoy the parks as we have. Our national parks have inspired Americans for nearly 100 years. As we approach the centennial of the National Park Service in 2016, please join us in helping to protect our national park legacy. Find out how at www.npca.org.
Hello, my name is Jim Gray, and I am a judge of the Superior Court in California and a former federal prosecutor in Los Angeles. I would like to talk to you for a moment about marijuana. Did you know that since the federal government first banned marijuana in 1937, usage in this country has actually gone up by about 4,000%? Or did you know that in the Netherlands, where adults are allowed to possess small amounts of marijuana and buy it from government-regulated businesses, fewer adults and fewer teenagers smoke marijuana than here in our country? Or that an American is arrested on marijuana charges every 38 seconds? If you are wondering if any of this makes sense, you are not alone. To find out more, contact the Marijuana Policy Project at 1-877-JOIN-MPP or visit them on the web at mpp.org. Thank you, and good luck to us all.
And we are back on the Zero Hour. Our last and final guest for the program. I've been looking forward to speaking with Carolyn Fiddler because her blog is very entertaining. Her commentary is very useful on what's happening at the state house level. And if we're talking about the corruption of the political process, then we can't leave the state houses out because the Koch brothers and Alec and those guys, they're very smart about taking control at the state level. Carolyn works for the Atlas Project, which was founded in order to build the institutional memory of the progressive movement and arm the progressive community with historical elections data, sophisticated analysis, real-time updates for all 50 states, and Carolyn tracks all of this. Hey, Carolyn, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You bet. And, I just wanted to catch up with some of the shenanigans at the state level because, we are all obsessed, or no, I shouldn't say we all, many of us, overly obsessed, I would say, about what's going on at the federal level, while, as we learned in Wisconsin with Scott Walker and the unions, or Michigan with the governor and the emergency manager laws, which took over the cities, a lot of action, a lot of undermining, in my opinion, of our progressive movement is taking place at the state level. So I appreciate the work you do. you, and I enjoy the way you put it. So wanted to just spend a couple minutes going over the events of the past week, if that's okay.
Sure, absolutely. And you're exactly right. So many things are happening on the state level that didn't get a lot of attention until Wisconsin kind of burst everyone's bubble in 2011. But just in the past week, Alabama and Mississippi are wrapping up their legislative sessions. And so you might not be surprised to learn that some bad things have come out of there. In Alabama, they've extended the waiting period for abortions from 24 to 48 hours. And in Mississippi, they just enacted a 20-week abortion ban with no exception for rape or incest.
You know, it's so horrible, and yet we're seeing so much of this. I was also struck in your blog about, this one just blew me away. I mean, I'm used to Scott Walker being outrageous, but you wrote that Governor Scott Walker signed a bill allowing election observers to stand as close as 3 feet from where voters register and receive ballots. So what's up with that? So if the Republicans or any other group wants to, Democrats for that matter, I guess, but if any group wants to, you know, accuse me of being a fraud or imply, for as they often do with minorities, for example, you don't deserve to be here, they can actually basically pretty much get up in your face if they're in Wisconsin. Is that a fair statement?
3 feet is not a lot of space. It's plenty close enough to intimidate people if that is your goal, I think. It's a really questionable bill that's got signed into law, and I'm sure it's going to be challenged in court because I don't know this to be a fact, but I suspect it's probably the closest limit anywhere.
Was that bill by any chance named the Wisconsin State Get All Up in Your Grill Act of 2014? Because it just seems so, you know, I mean, 3 feet is not far. Admittedly, I have a heightened need for personal space, as my report card said in preschool, but that's close. And that's intimidation, and it's actually quite ugly when you think about it. You also mentioned that the governor of Maine vetoed 2 bills that had passed both chambers of the legislature unanimously. Isn't he going to be overridden?
Chances are good. It takes I believe, a 2/3 vote in the legislature to override a governor's veto, and with a unanimous vote passing these bills in the first place, I really don't think it's going to be much of an issue, especially since one of them was a bill that would have strengthened child abuse prevention programs in the state. He vetoed that, and then on the same day, he decided that April was going to be Child Abuse and Neglect Prevention Month. So, you know.
So let's just instant replay that, because I don't think people's minds can wrap around that very easily. So Governor Paul LePage vetoed a bill strengthening child abuse prevention programs on the same day that he declared the month of April to be Child Abuse and Neglect Prevention Month. Is that right?
It was April Fool's Day, so maybe it was a big joke, only I don't think it was. So, yeah, that's exactly what he did, because Paul LePage, he's a really special guy. He's done a lot of really interesting and, frankly, outrageous things in his tenure as governor. So, and for the first couple of years, he actually got away with it because he had Republicans in the legislature and the majority in both chambers. But after 2012, they've been able to stop him. So,
see, this is not good stuff, and you know, I mean, these are dislikable people. I mean, that's one of the things that, you know, I think you make a good point of. Their values are not the kinds of values we associate with good Americans. And, you know, the other thing that just caught my eye in your roundup, Louisiana's ban on cockfighting has loopholes because it makes no reference to game fowls, roosters, or other birds. And at least one person believes that chicken boxing is a legitimate sport, quote unquote. You can't make this stuff up, right? And that he's 15th generation fighting chickens in his district, and that a veteran cockfighter, 53-year veteran, somebody said, God put the fight in the chicken, not man.
It's true. That's something someone said in front of other people in opposition to this legislation that would close the loophole in the cockfighting ban. I mean, it's weird enough that there was a loophole in the cockfighting ban. But yeah, so these are things that really happen. I mean, state legislatures usually are part-time, and they're full of normal folks who get elected sometimes without anyone noticing. So you just
the normal folks I know don't say things like that. But then again, you're right. I mean, that's representative democracy at work, I guess. But God put the fighting chicken on man. To me, this is a free market right wing ideology in a nutshell. Because first of all, God didn't put the metal spurs on the chicken that tear them to pieces. God didn't starve them and then throw them at each other in a ring. I've seen cockfights. They're horrible. And anyway, on that weird note, God put the fighting chicken on man. I'm sorry we didn't have more time. I hope you'll come back, Carolyn Fiddler of the Atlas Project, and talk to us again about action at the state level.
I would love to. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for joining us, and we're going to have to leave it there. Remember, God put the fight in the chicken, not man, but we're going to take the money out of politics. I'm RJ Eskow. Thanks for joining us. This is The Zero Hour.
I'm Gary Johnson, former governor of New Mexico. Last year, my state became the 12th state to allow medical use of marijuana by patients who are seriously ill. Some people were surprised that a Republican governor supports medical marijuana, but I'm hardly alone. Groups like the American College of Physicians, American Nurses Association, and American Public Health Association have all acknowledged the medical value of marijuana. New research about medical marijuana is coming out almost every day, showing remarkable potential in all sorts of serious conditions, including cancer, AIDS, and chronic pain. But some in government still want to put politics and ideology ahead of public health. To learn more about medical marijuana and what you can do to help, contact the Marijuana Policy Project at 1-877-JOIN-MPP or visit them on the web at mpp.org. Thanks.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.